Chapter 451. Tao Manwu was riding on the neck of a certain bad guy with a clear conscience, looking into the distance and leisurely touring the temple fair. Suddenly, he noticed that the guy with the fake mask had stopped. Following his line of sight, he saw a skinny young lady standing in front of him, timidly handing out a thin brochure. Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment and took the brochure from the skinny young lady. This kind of brochure was a small trick used by storytellers to attract business. It roughly wrote a few sentences about the content of the story, whether it was about the Iron Horseman, the fireworks Fendai, or the ghost period. The fragrance of wine was afraid of the deep alley. Other than the main character staying in the wine shop or tea house, the person setting up the stage on the street would invite customers to come in and listen to the story. The level of extravagance was linked to the level of fame. Some famous storytellers could often hang a golden banner outside a downtown restaurant. This one was quite shabby, with only a piece of paper at the end of a red post. But what surprised Su Fengnian was that he recognized this young lady. She was the grandfather and granddaughter he saw in a secluded tea house in the city before leaving Bailiang. The old and blind storyteller was talking while drinking wine, and the young lady was holding a low-quality pipa. Su Fengnian was even more shocked when he saw what was written in the brochure. She dared to tell the story of the heir of Bailiang traveling thousands of miles in the city of Baimang? He looked around and quietly watched the young lady hand out more than a dozen brochures before following her into a relatively quiet tea house with Tao Manwu on his back. After sitting down, he ordered a pot of tea. Sure enough, he saw that there was an empty space in the center of the tea house. The blind old man habitually placed a bamboo board and a bowl of turbid wine on a small wooden stool. After his granddaughter handed over the simple brochure, she trotted to the old man, carefully picked up the pipa, and whispered a few words to her grandfather. Probably because the old man's story of His Royal Highness of Bailiang was too fresh and shocking, most of the brochures he handed out attracted real customers who were willing to pay for the tea. The owner of the tea house beamed with joy and was very satisfied with his vision and courage. The blind storyteller picked up the bowl and took a sip of wine to moisten his throat. He didn't get to the main topic, but said in a clear voice, "Today, I won't talk about the smoke powder of a man and a woman entangling together, nor will I talk about the spiritual monsters outside the human world. I'll just talk about the heir of Bailiang traveling thousands of miles with 2 swords at his waist. It's enough to make the officials laugh a little." When the old storyteller finished speaking, the young lady took advantage of the opportunity to play the pipa. The old man picked up the bowl and drank another mouthful of the strong wine rewarded by the owner of the tea house. He gently put it down, picked up the bamboo board, and recited according to the rules: "Intelligence and cleverness are innate, ignorance and hedonism may not be true. Absurdity is only because the times have risen, war and war horses laugh deeply. The long river of 9 bends is shallower than the heart. 10 heavy armored horses are like thunder. How can wine and women forget the country? Only then do you know that poetry and books mislead the world." The sound of the pipa gradually rose, but it was still like a small bridge in flowing water, not sonorous. Su Fengnian, who was sitting in the corner, smiled knowingly. He didn't look at the grandfather-granddaughter pair, but just looked out the window at the stream of traffic. He somewhat admired this old storyteller, who actually dared to speak well of His Royal Highness in Baimang. Fortunately, Baimang's culture was rough and open-minded. There was no literary prison, and very few people were convicted for speaking. Even if one criticized the government, it wasn't a big deal. Of course, what the old man said was based on hearsay, and it was very different from the truth. However, it was quite a gimmick, and the audience found it very interesting. Especially when he talked about how His Highness the heir apparent had single-handedly faced off against Prince Jingon Zhao Hang and 1,000 armored cavalry outside Xiongfan City. Some of the customers who didn't take it seriously at first became engrossed in the story. A few of the audience members who originally wanted to leave also returned to their seats and asked for another pot of tea from the waiter. The blind old man also pretended to stop at this moment. The customers knew that he was going to collect money. There were a few tables that threw some copper coins into a large white porcelain bowl. Ding ding dong dong. It was very pleasing to the ear. The elder no longer kept them in suspense and continued to speak tirelessly. When he reached the part where the Prince of Northern Liang used a spear to stab a valiant cavalry general to death, the guests immediately gasped in surprise and clicked their tongues. They first looked at each other in dismay, and then began to discuss spiritedly. Most likely, they didn't believe that this prince had such ability in a horse battle. As for the Prince of Jingon, Zhao Hang, The northern Mang people had heard about it because the storyteller had told them too much about the Liang dynasty's prince's struggle for the throne. They knew that this vassal king was only unlucky, unable to become the supreme ruler of the 9 and 5. Su Fengnian saw that Tao Manwu was speechless, and his eyes were wide open. He looked like he wanted to rush over and urge the old man to quickly talk. Su Fengnian pricked his finger under the table and dripped a drop of blood to nourish the sword. After keeping the sword in his sleeve, he poured himself a cup of tea and closed his eyes to concentrate. The blind old man was very clever. When the audience was a little impatient, he finally talked about the ancestral court of Taoism, Mount Longhu. He talked about the great General Su Zhao's deeds in Jianghu. The audience was immediately intrigued again. Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. There weren't many people who survived the battle on the snowy plains, and those who survived would never reveal the secrets of heaven. The old man was very mysterious. When he talked about the Mount Huiyu's purple thunder formation, he only said that it was the supreme divine ability of the sword god Li Chungang. Most of the audience scoffed. Looking at the situation, wasn't this old man wearing a sheepskin coat even more powerful than our Beimang's god of war, Tuoba? Then why wasn't this old god of sword among the top 10 martial arts judges? They only heard that there was a Dong Tai holding a peach branch. The old man heard the boos and countless boos, but he wasn't anxious. At this time, the sound of the pipa became louder and louder. It was like a silver bottle breaking and splashing water, making people worry if the little girl's weak and delicate hands could hold on. In the magnificent atmosphere created by the pipa, the old man talked about the finale of the show, the arrival of the flying sword. He said that the old god of sword used the word sword to make thousands of swords from Mount Hui and Mount Longhu fly to the snowy plains and cover the sky. The audience was dumbfounded. Oh my, could it be that he was really one of the few immortals on Earth? When the old man talked about how Mount Longhu's master Zhao asked the old god of sword to return to his residence, the old man paused and said word by word, "Do you know what happened next?" This time, the tea guests were very happy to give the copper coins. Soon, the big bowl was filled to the brim. Some impatient people ran to throw away the copper coins and sat back in their seats. They hurriedly said, "Old man, tell us." The blind storyteller drank a mouthful of wine and said with a smile, "Senior Li, who is in the Sword Celestial Realm, sent a message to the big Mount Longhu. His Royal Highness said that there was no need to return it." The whole tea house was dead silent. Then, there was a roar of applause. Many tea guests who felt that their anger had been vented began to hit the table. Tao Manwu, who was beside Su Fengnian, chuckled. Su Fengnian took out a small piece of silver and shook his head. The little girl originally thought that the old man's storytelling was brilliant and varied. Seeing that this stingy man was unexpectedly generous, she finally smiled. She grabbed the silver and ran to the center of the tea house. She gently placed it into the bowl with her face flushed red. Then, she ran back to Su Fengnian's side and snuggled up to him, not daring to look at others. Everyone only thought that this young man was most likely a rich son who had too much money and nowhere to spend it. They didn't think much of it. When the blind storyteller talked about the Eastern Sea's martial emperor city, he only said that His Highness the Crown Prince carried a bowl to the top of the city wall, but he didn't tell the whole story. The guests in the tea house were shocked to the core. They all thought that this hereditary crown prince of the northern Liang was really daring. They didn't investigate the details and heard that the storyteller was telling a story. When the old man said that the world's number one, Wang Xianji, flew to the surface of the East Sea, opened the gate of heaven with sword god's sword, and made the East Sea rise, the tea house suddenly became silent. Beimang's people were valiant. No matter how feminine the Flying Fox City was, it was still in comparison to other cities. After all, the blood of warriors still flowed in their bones. They could look down on the emperors, dukes, and marquises of the Liang dynasty, and look down on those soft and romantic scholars. However, they definitely wouldn't look down on the famous General Gu Jiantang from the spring and autumn period. They also didn't dare to look down on the city master of Martial Emperor City, who had dominated Jianghu for 60 years. Everyone in Beimang only regretted that this old warrior wasn't from their dynasty. However, they wouldn't doubt that Wang Xianji could be ranked above Tuoba and become the world's number one. It was to the extent that they felt great reverence towards the mortal enemy of northern Mang, the butcher Su Xiao. There was no lack of people in northern Mang who sincerely admired Su Xiao, regardless of whether it was in the marketplace or in the imperial court. When the rumor spread that the emperor was willing to marry Su Xiao, they angrily scolded the arrogant lame Su for not knowing what was good for him. In the end, few people said that Su Xiao didn't deserve to share the world with the Empress. In Bei Mang's view, who else in the world was more worthy of their Empress than the butcher? The Emperor of the Liang dynasty? Get out of here and F***ck off. In the end, the tide rose on the banks of the Guangling River. His Royal Highness cut off his flesh. Li Chungang cut off 2,600 armor with his sword. The tea house was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Only the sound of the pipa could be heard. Even the manager of the tea house was dumbfounded. He slowly took out a few pieces of silver that hadn't even warmed up yet, and had the waiter put them in his bowl. He didn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. Luckily, he had invited this grandfather-grandson pair to tell stories today and earned a lot of extra money. He had made up his mind to let them continue to tell stories for a few more days. He was sure that business would be booming and money would flow in. After the story was finished, some of the wealthier customers added a bit more money to spare. Su Fengnian patted Tao Manwu's little head and said with a smile, "Go, tell that sister who plays the pipa that I'm inviting them to tea." Chapter 452. Tao Manwu ran over cheerfully. The grandfather and grandson pair usually did not go through these formalities, but perhaps because they saw that the young lady was innocent and looked kind, and that the young master sitting by the window did not seem like a bad person, they agreed. Su Fengnian beckoned for the waiter and ordered a pot of good tea and wine. Tao Manwu sat beside Su Fengnian and looked at her sister with admiration. She had only learned the zither and knew nothing about the pipa. She only felt that this young lady was very impressive. The blind old man drank a mouthful of wine and took a sip, slowly savoring the aftertaste. A knowing smile appeared on his weathered face. "Thank you, young master, for the money and wine. It's a pity that this old man only knows how to tell stories and has no way of repaying you." Su Fengnian smiled. "I just thought that the stories were good to listen to and had some money on me. It wasn't easy for me to pass the time, so it's a pleasant surprise. Old sir, you don't have to take it to heart. Just treat it as meeting an old friend in a foreign land. It's normal for the one who has more money in his pocket to treat you to some wine." The old man laughed heartily. "That's true. Young master is magnanimous, so this old man can't be unreasonable. Come, let's have a toast. Although this wine is not as authentic as the green ant from Bailiang, it's still good wine." The two drank the wine in one gulp. As for the young ladies, they drank tea. The shopkeeper also gave them some cakes and fruits that did not cost much. They were also in a relaxed mood. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Old sir, aren't you afraid of getting into trouble by saying good things about the heir of Bailiang in Bei Mang?" The old storyteller shook his head. "What's there to be afraid of? In today's world, if you want to earn more money than your peers, you can't be afraid of trouble." Su Fengnian saw the scars on the back of the old man's hand as he held the bowl. He asked, "Old sir, were you once a soldier of Bailiang? The knife wound on the back of my hand was not light." The old man probably had a fiery temper when he was young. Now that he spoke without any scruples, he laughed straightforwardly. "Isn't that so? At that time, I was in so much pain that I almost cried for my parents. At that time, I had just joined the Northern Liang army and was laughed at by the old sergeant. Later on, I suffered more serious injuries, but I gritted my teeth and endured it. Now that I'm old, I really admire myself. However, young master might not know about the Northern Liang army at that time. Heh, if you didn't have any scars, how could you have the nerve to greet your fellow soldiers who killed people shoulder to shoulder? You would have been treated as a little girl. It's funny to say that after joining the army for a few years, I couldn't wait to be hacked a few more times. Before our old sergeant died, he said, 'Whoever wants to usurp my position, take off your clothes. Whoever has more scars than me will be the sergeant. In short, whoever has more heads than me will be the sergeant. In short, whoever has more heads than me will have to be the sergeant.'" Su Fengnian muttered, "Old sir, why did you say that you were in the Bailiang army back then?" The storyteller drank a mouthful of wine and hesitated for a moment. After taking another big gulp, he slowly smiled bitterly and said, "These words can only be said to an outsider like you, young master. It's not a secret, and it's not a family scandal. Back then, our general defeated the Western Wall and destroyed the West Chu dynasty, which was almost as powerful as Liang at that time. Everyone in the Bailiang army was filled with resentment. They thought about how easy it was for those civil officials in the capital to talk. Even the old emperor was suspicious of the general. Why don't we just rebel? Let the great general be the emperor himself. The great general would sit on the dragon throne and wear the dragon robe. Who wouldn't be convinced? It's a pity that the general refused. In fact, it's not a big deal. For us old soldiers in Liaodong, as long as we serve the general, it's fine if we don't want to be the emperor. Later on, I followed him to Bailiang, and the atmosphere changed. The general was still the general. No one complained, but the general was not a man with 4 heads and 6 arms. Some of the generals under him probably thought that the world was peaceful and that it was time for them to earn back their money. Later on, many civil officials who had never fought in wars also climbed up the ranks. This old man and some of my old brothers were disheartened. Especially me. I was blind and didn't want to occupy the latrine pit and waste the rations of the Bailiang army. Seeing that the young master opposite him did not speak, the storyteller laughed and said, "Young master, don't think that the 300,000 cavalrymen of Bailiang are easy to deal with just because this old man nagged. Some of the officials are unreasonable, but the general is still the general. To tell you the truth, it may sound unpleasant to your ears. As long as the general is the king of Bailiang, you Baimang won't be able to take a single step south. If the general doesn't defeat the Baimang royal court, you should pray to Buddha." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Drink." The blind storyteller raised his bowl and said, "Drink." The old man drank to his heart's content and muttered to himself, "The reason why I'm not dead yet is because I have to take care of this poor granddaughter of mine. Also, I'm afraid that the people of Bailiang will lose their morale. What if something happens to the general? What will happen to the 300,000 cavalrymen?" 4 or 5 years ago, when this old man heard that His Royal Highness was idle and spent a lot of money in everything he did, he really wanted to go to the Bailiang palace and beat him up. Only later did I find out that this was not the case. Thinking that since I don't have many years left to live, I'll visit as many towns as I can in Baimang and have a good talk with the Baimang people about our future king of Bailiang. That way, you northern barbarians won't be able to sleep well, haha. At most, this old man will be scolded and beaten a few times. I won't die. If I really die in Baimang, it won't be worse than those old brothers who died on the battlefield. The old man came back to his senses and said with a guilty smile, "Young master from Flying Fox City, this old man is babbling nonsense. Please don't take it to heart. I drank too much this time." Su Fengnian shook his head and said with a Bailiang accent, "Old sir, how do you know that I'm not from Bailiang?" The storyteller was stunned and thought quickly. He guessed that this was a descendant of a Bailiang merchant who came to Baimang to do business. However, to be careful, he lowered his voice and said with a smile from the bottom of his heart, "No wonder you said that you met an old friend in a foreign land. Don't worry, this old man knows what's important. Today, I'll just treat it as drinking a pot of good wine with a young master from Flying Fox City." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "In the future, if this storyteller annoys the petty-minded Baimang people, you can scold the king of Bailiang and the crown prince of Bailiang. It doesn't matter. The world is big, but staying alive is the most important thing. Your granddaughter hasn't found a good man and is still relying on you to earn money." The storyteller shook his head and said, "What's there to scold? The great general has never done anything wrong in his life. If I scold the great general, I'll be rolled to death by the old Dakarches in the underworld. His Royal Highness can't bear to scold him. He was blind in the past and scolded him so much. If he scolded him one more time, I won't be able to die in peace. Since my granddaughter was born into the Song family, this is her life. There's nothing to complain about." The young lady holding the pipa smiled gently. She accepted her fate and was calm. Su Fengnian put down his wine cup and said softly, "Old sir, if you trust me, can you lend me your granddaughter's pipa to try playing? My second sister is especially good at martial pipa. I'm not as talented as her, but I've been influenced by her and know a thing or two. Maybe I can give you some simple insights." The old man said with a smile, "What's there to be reluctant about? Ariu, pass it to the young master." Su Fengnian smiled, "Miss, please pass me the zither wiping cloth as well." The young lady blushed and stood up. She carefully handed over her beloved pipa. After Su Fengnian carefully wiped the pipa, he sat upright and thought for a while. Then, the 4 fingers of his right hand were lined up. From the zither string to the winding string, he quickly flicked it to the right. Then, he withdrew 3 fingers and only used his right index finger to wind the string. The 3 strings of the old zither were played one after another. 1 stroke and 1 hook. The eyes of the young lady who had played the pipa for many years lit up. This pipa was only the lowest grade of whitewood pipa. Compared to those high-grade pipas made of red sandalwood, rosewood, and rosewood, it was far from being strong enough to reach 2 or 3 li away. Su Fengnian gently demonstrated the strokes one by one. Then, he raised his head and smiled at the young lady standing next to him. For a whitewood pipa, the sound quality is considered good. If money allows, you can add a little glue. Old Sir said that the content of the book is especially critical of the pipa's brittleness. Also, the first string is not far from breaking. But in my opinion, since you're playing the pipa for the audience to enjoy, breaking the strings is also a beautiful thing that everyone will be happy to see. There's no need to rush to change the first string. I'll tell you more about the Chow family's pipa techniques. You can remember as much as you can. One spoke, the other listened. The blind old man sipped his wine slowly and leisurely. After Su Fengnian finished teaching the Chow family's techniques, which were recognized as almost extinct, he stood up and bid farewell. Holding Tao Manwa's small hand, he left the tea house. The young lady took back the pipa and muttered, "Grandfather, who is this young master?" The old man drank the last mouthful of wine. His face was rosy and he smiled. "He's probably a good person I met by chance." The old storyteller might not know in his life that he had once spoken face-to-face with the king of Baelyong about Baelyong. Chapter 453. Tao Manwa's small head rested on top of Su Fengnian's large head as they returned to the inn together. It was better to be happy together than to be happy alone. The little lass was prepared to show the young lady the ingenious spider box in her hands, but she didn't expect that when she arrived at the entrance, she would see a ruckus outside. There were many green-skinned scoundrels cursing outside, their mouths full of vulgar words. Shopkeeper's son was standing on the stairs, bowing and smiling apologetically to a burly man. The burly man secretly handed over a pouch of silver to the shopkeeper. His originally cold smile suddenly changed as he threw the pouch of silver onto the ground and punched the old man in the chest. Shopkeeper's son's wife and 2 daughters were hiding in the inn's entrance, crying endlessly. When they saw the pillar of their family being knocked to the ground, they were stunned and didn't dare to support him, fearing that they would provoke these vicious villains. Su Fengnian asked the bystanders around him, and only then did he know the general situation. Shopkeeper's son's wife and eldest daughter were sightseeing in the city's western district when they encountered a scoundrel who wanted to take advantage of women. His eldest daughter's skin was thin and her temper was fierce, so when her bottom was touched, she immediately slapped him. The green-skinned scoundrel was thin and weak, so he didn't expect the young lady to be so fierce. After being slapped to the ground, he lost face. Seeing that she was an unfamiliar face, he didn't dare to act on the spot. He called a few of his idle neighbors and followed her to the Eastern District restaurant. After arguing with the local hoodlums, they found out that shopkeeper's son didn't have any backing. Thus, they called a big brother from the underworld and called over 20 of their friends to kill him. They were determined to cut off a large amount of fat from shopkeeper's son's body. How could 7 or 8 taels of silver enter their eyes? After shopkeeper's son earned some money, he didn't have to worry about food or clothing. He had read a few books, so he had a scholarly air. He wanted to save face, so when he was hit by a single punch, the pain was secondary. In the eyes of his neighbors, he felt even more embarrassed. Especially when the 3 women in his house saw this, he felt even more aggrieved. He crawled up and picked up a wooden stool, wanting to fight the hoodlums to the death. The leader of the group, the green-skinned scoundrel, had practiced martial arts for many years. He had a lot of skills, so why would he care about a wooden stool? He used a kick and the wooden stool was split in half. Shopkeeper's son, who was full of hot-blooded blood, was dumbfounded. Just as he was hesitating whether or not to go to the kitchen and get a kitchen knife, a skinny scoundrel sneaked up behind him and kicked him in the butt, causing him to fall flat on his face. The skinny scoundrel's cheekbones were prominent, and his eyes were small and deep. Usually, when the gangs fought, they would use their mouths instead of their hands. He felt that this sneak attack was quite heroic, but it was a pity that he stretched his leg too far, causing his leg to cramp. He could only limp to the side, which attracted a lot of ridicule. The skinny scoundrel was about to flip out, but from the corner of his eyes, he saw that the leader of the gang, who had stolen the limelight, was frowning. He immediately shut his mouth and retreated to the side. Su Fengnian put down Tao Manwu and walked to the green-skinned scoundrel while holding his hand. He very nimbly handed over a few 10 taels banknotes and said with a smile, "This leader, I don't know how brother's son was disrespectful. I hope that you can give me a chance to spend money to avoid disaster. He didn't have to give face to anyone, but he had to give face to money. The green-skinned scoundrel, who had a ferocious black tiger tattooed on his arm, coldly asked, "Brat, which gang are you from?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "This lowly one cannot compare to First Master's domineering demeanor, and is only doing odd jobs for the City Lord Mansion's second young master. I'm not considered anyone important. Second young master took a fancy to this restaurant's 5-sprout soup, and as a result, I developed a friendship with Manager Sunday. Thus, I came here to ask for this restaurant's signature vegetarian dish. First master is magnanimous, so please forgive Manager Sunday. If this lowly one fails in this matter, even if second young master hears about it, the restaurant will not be in the right. Second young master has a lot of matters to attend to, so he absolutely won't care about such trivial matters. However, if this lowly one fails in this matter and does not leave a good impression on second young master, then this lowly one will be miserable and won't be able to obtain even half a copper coin's worth of profit. Therefore, these 30 to 40 taels of silver can be considered as a token of my respect to First Master. First Master is benevolent and does not cut off this lowly one's path to wealth. What do you think?" The leader's face was gloomy and uncertain. In the end, he smiled and put the banknotes into his pocket. He patted Su Fengnian's shoulder and said, "Since little brother has admitted his mistake, this matter isn't a big deal. I'll give you face and let it go. In the future, when you go to the western part of the city, find me for a drink. It's simple. Just say the name of Flying Fox Town's Guanxi." The commotion died down, and the immortals who were watching from the sidelines also dispersed and entered the restaurant. Manager's son, who was still in a state of shock, asked in a low voice, "Brother Su, are you really a noble of the City Lord's mansion?" Su Fengnian picked a clean table and sat down. He said with a smile, "How could I be related to the City Lord's mansion? It's just that there are some elders in my family who have some business dealings with the mansion's steward. I'm not familiar with the second young master of the Tantai family. This time, I went to the City Lord's mansion and shamelessly put myself under the guise of an assassin. I don't know if I'll be able to meet the second young master. Brother Sun, you know that my family is in the business of porcelain, but the second young master is an expert in this field. If I'm lucky enough to be recognized by him, I might be able to drag the second young master to the restaurant for a meal." Manager Sun's mind calmed down. He rubbed his hands and said with relief, "I don't dare to accept the second young master's money. It's already a great honor to be able to come to the restaurant. Brother Su, today's matter is all thanks to your righteous help. I'll go get the money to pay you back. Also, no matter how long you stay in the inn, as long as it costs money, I'll take care of it. If you don't agree, I'll be angry with you." Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment, then said with a smile, "Brother Sun, don't haggle over the 30 or 40 taels of silver with me. I'm the descendant of a merchant who went to Guanghan House. If you're stubborn, you won't recognize me as your brother. In the future, as long as I go to Flying Fox City, I'll definitely come to your place to eat and drink. I won't be careless about this. I'm not joking with you, so don't feel bad." The anger in Manager Sun's chest was swept away and he laughed heartily. After sitting down, he waved to his wife and daughter who were standing in the distance and said, "Come, say hello to Brother Su." Chapter 454. Even the little girl who despised Su Fengnian for being too old, along with her mother and elder sister, respectfully bowed to him. The three girls were like raindrops on a pear blossom. Having survived a calamity, they were grateful to Su Fengnian. Not to mention, it seemed that this handsome young master with a saber had some connections with the City Lord Manor. This made them feel that Manager's son had such a young master who called him brother, and that they shared his glory with him. The eldest daughter was originally embarrassed that her father had been beaten to the ground in 2 or 3 moves. She wished she could dig a hole and hide in it. But now, she only felt that her father was brave and had the ability to recognize people. She didn't have the slightest bit of complaint. As a businesswoman, Manager Sun's wife was even more worldly and clever. She personally returned with a pot of good wine and poured wine for her husband and Su Fengnian. She wanted to strike while the iron was hot and tie this noble young master to the restaurant. In the future, if there were any conflicts with those green-skinned men, he wouldn't have to charge and break through enemy lines, but at least he wouldn't have to watch from the sidelines. Manager Sun's youngest daughter was still in a daze. When her elder sister pinched her arm, she raised her head and saw her mother give her a meaningful glance. She mouthed the words Tantai's eldest young master. The little girl immediately became spirited. She didn't care about anything else and anxiously asked, "Brother Su, if you go to the City Lord Manor, will you be able to see Tontai's eldest young master? If you see him, you must remember to mention me. My name is Sun Xiaochun." The little girl's arm was pinched again. She immediately came to her senses and said with a smile, "There's also my elder sister. She's called Sun Jiqiu." Manager Sun and his wife looked at each other and smiled. They felt somewhat helpless towards their daughter who had gone mad. The two sisters' eyes were filled with hope and expectation. They didn't care about being reserved or shy. Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. He could only nod and say, "If there's a chance, I'll definitely put in a few good words for you too. But I can't guarantee that I'll be able to see that heroic young master." The elder sister, Sun Jiqiu, was older and knew more about the ways of the world. She smiled and nodded. The younger sister, Sun Xiaochun, had a serious expression. She said with a deadpan expression, "You must see him." Their mother pretended to slap the little girl, but her tone was gentle. "Don't be rude." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Sister-in-law, it's fine, it's just a small matter." Afterwards, the three women went into the room to talk about some private matters. Shopkeeper Sun, on the other hand, had a complacent smile on his face as he chatted with a few of his old friends who had rushed over after hearing the news. Su Fengnian returned to his room at the inn. Tao Manwu put away the Chi Chao box, opened his bag, and counted the silver pieces one by one. Su Fengnian laughed and scolded, "If there really was a thief, would he only steal a few pieces of silver? You stole them all long ago." The little girl, who was good at running a household, glared back at him and continued to count the money. With his back to Tao Manwu, Su Fengnian steered a flying sword from the silkworm armor 12 scabbard, and secretly nurtured it. After counting the silver pieces, not a single one was missing. Tao Manwu tied up his bag, kicked off his boots, and arranged the Chi Chao box and a porcelain pillow. He rested his head on the bed and looked left and right, his eyes full of joy. Su Fengnian hid the flying sword and looked at his palms, where the calluses were gradually peeling off after fusing with the big yellow courtyard. Ordinary people used their blood to nurture a sword. Not to mention 12. Even 2 or 3 swords would be enough to make their hands unsightly. However, with the big yellow courtyard, growing the longevity lotus, there was no need to worry. His qi and blood were as vigorous as the tides of Guangling. Su Fengnian sat on the edge of the bed, his body leaning back, and his eyes closed in concentration. Tao Manwu was in a dilemma, but in the end, he generously stuffed the porcelain pillow under the back of his head. Holding the Chi Chao box with a small spider web inside, he sat up and looked at the guy beside him, wanting to say something but hesitating. Su Fengnian, with his eyes closed, calmly asked, "Do you want to know why I could have taught those scoundrels a lesson, but instead humbly gave them money and settled the matter peacefully?" The little girl nodded and pouted, feeling a little wronged and resentful. She felt that this guy lacked even the slightest bit of chivalry. Su Fengnian's lips curled up, and he softly said, "I'm a scoundrel, but I'm a rootless duckweed, floating wherever I go. Shopkeeper Sun's family of 4 are ordinary people who have taken root here and can't leave for the rest of their lives. The green-skinned goods of Flying Fox City are clever and cunning. To put it nicely, they judge the situation and size up the situation. To put it bluntly, they bully the weak and fear the strong. Unless I kill them once, they won't let Shopkeeper Sun off easily. But I have a private matter to attend to, and I also have a burden like you who can only help me carry the money. I can't possibly fight over such a small matter. In the end, each family's misfortune and fortune will be their own. Today, I only helped because of the pot of tea and because I was afraid that I would have to go through the trouble of moving to another place. Otherwise, with my fickle personality, I wouldn't have bothered to pretend to be a good person. This is called, each family sweeps the snow in front of their own door, ignoring the frost on the roof of others' roof. If you want to find a hero who can help those in distress to travel the Jianghu with you, then I'm sorry, little girl. I'm sure I'll disappoint you." Tao Manwu weakly snorted. When she saw him teaching the pipa playing elder sister at the tea house, she felt that he wasn't so bad. Now she felt that he wasn't that good after all. Su Fengnian held the little girl's arm and quietly unblocked her acupuncture points. He sarcastically said, "Good people have good karma. That's just a saying that people are afraid of disaster. In fact, not many people are willing to be good people. Generally speaking, good people don't have good karma. It's just that no one has the opportunity to let you know." Tao Manwu only felt that her arm was hot. It wasn't comfortable or uncomfortable, so she endured it. Su Fengnian calmly said, "Change your arm." She turned around and stretched out her arm. After Su Fengnian succeeded, he teased, "They all say that men and women shouldn't touch each other. You don't have any shame." Tao Manwu ignored this and sighed like an old man. She bit her lip and said, "Uncle Dong said that a country's weapon should not be shown to others. A gentleman hides his weapon and waits for the right moment to move. A villain holds his weapon and clamors non-stop." Su Fengnian opened his eyes and said with a smile, "Your Uncle Dong is a knowledgeable person. Isn't he very similar to me?" The little girl rolled her eyes. She was too lazy to talk to this scoundrel who flattered himself. She just wanted to take back her beloved porcelain pillow. Su Fengnian pressed down on the porcelain pillow and said shamelessly, "I'm not giving it back." The little girl knew that she couldn't compete in strength, so she showed a disdainful expression. After spending so much time with this scoundrel, she seemed to have learned some small skills to make herself more comfortable. Tao Manwu curiously put on his boots and ran to the window, standing on his tiptoes to see what was going on. Flying Fox City was dumbfounded. It was said that the eldest son of Tantai Station was beaten up by a damn fatty. What was even more infuriating was that this damn fatty had a beautiful daughter by his side. Judging from her posture, she was the fatty's little wife. More than 100 valiant iron cavalry rode straight into Flying Fox City. The iron hooves crushed all the women in the city. Later, the well-informed high-ranking officials and dignitaries in Flying Fox City turned from anger to fear. The damn fatty who broke into the city without following the law was not only a real military general, but also a leading figure in the military circle of the southern officials in Beimang. He was the most exceptional second-grade general in Beimang in the past 30 years. He was only one step away from the 3 third-grade generals in the south. Not to mention the governor, no one in Dragon Waste Province, where the border army was weak, would dare to offend this damn fatty except for those who held the provincial edict. Afterwards, shocking news entered their ears one after another, making them even more frightened to the point of pissing their pants. The woman in colorful clothes at the damn fatty's side was the daughter of one of the Northern Mang's 5 great sex weapon-carrying mountain master, as well as the damn fatty's second wife. Meanwhile, this damned fatty's first wife had an even more extraordinary background. No wonder she could suppress the weapon-carrying mountain's precious young miss. The eldest son of Tantai Station only blocked the city gate with his men, but the soldiers and horses were scattered. The eldest son himself was forced off his horse by the fairy who came down from Bing Tea Mountain. For a time, the city was in turmoil. There was only a tea house far away from the quarrels. People listened to the stories of the eldest son of Baelyong's travels told by the blind storyteller and paid no attention to the outside world. An old Confucian scholar who had just entered the city sat by the window. He ordered a pot of cheap tea and placed a worn-out bookcase by his feet. Opposite him sat a middle-aged man with a sword on his back with a solemn expression. Sword Chi approached. Chapter 455. Hundreds of cavalrymen charged into the city, clad in heavy armor. The fat general in the lead weighed at least 100 kilograms, but he didn't give off the feeling of being a burden at all. His body was strong, his skin was dark, and his mount was also a heavy black horse. The cavalrymen behind him galloped in a straight line. Beside the fat general, there was a delicate woman riding side by side. She had a lively temperament, and her colorful clothes fluttered in the wind, making her look like a fairy. The young woman wore a dark and serene green skirt with a soft and delicate yellow inner garment, which was exquisite and elegant. An ancient sword with a peacock green scabbard hung on her waist. Even when she galloped with the Beimang's #1 cavalryman, she didn't look like a vase at all, which made the fat general's personal cavalryman look even more majestic. The Beimang dynasty had a vast territory, but ever since the Liang dynasty unified the spring and autumn period, it had launched 6 grand wars with all its might, but only one of them involved the central line of the Dragon Waste State. The main battlefields were the eastern line of the 2 Liao provinces, and the western line of the Beimang Gusai province and the Liang Liangzhou province, which was 100 steps away from Flying Fox City. The fat man slowed down his horse and looked up at the hanging sword pavilion. The travel-worn fat man spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm and cursed in a low voice. The cavalrymen behind him moved as if they were one person, and the distance between the horse's legs didn't change because of the slow speed. The fat man's surname was Dong. His father was a scholar left behind by the spring and autumn period, and his mother was a girl from a small family in Beimang. After joining the army for more than 10 years, The fat man Dong had turned his 200 kilograms of fat into muscles. He had become the most dazzling military hero of the Baimang Southern Dynasty. He was even on the same level as the governor of Gusai Province, the three great generals, and the important ministers of the Southern Dynasty. According to the laws of Baimang, even if the officials of the Southern Dynasty and the ministers of the Northern Dynasty had the same rank, their ranks would still be lowered by one rank. Only the nobles of the Southern Dynasty who had been specially rewarded by the Empress of Baimang could have their ranks increased by half a rank. This fat man was the only person in the Baimang dynasty who had been specially rewarded by the Empress of Baimang. Therefore, even though he was supposed to be a rank 4 general, his military power had risen to rank 2. The three great generals of the Western Front, Huang Songpu, Lu Gui, Yang Yuanzhan, and Gusai Jinsi, who could make the border tremble with just a sneeze, had all been cursed by this fat man. Among them, he had even slammed the table with Huang Songpu, who had been specially rewarded by the Empress of Baimang. It was even rumored that he had rolled up his sleeves and had a fight with Yang Yuanzhan. It was a miracle that the fat man was still alive today. Fatty Dong gnashed his teeth in anger. How did that old turtle Murong Baoding manage the little bastards in his clan? Murong Zhongtai had already given him a secret letter, but he still dared to lead his private army to rob his brother, sister-in-law, and niece. Did he really think that he could sit back and relax just because he was ranked 9th on the martial roll? Putting aside the murder of his sister-in-law, if anything happened to his niece, who he regarded as his own daughter, then this old man would fight with Murong Baoding to death for the rest of his life. If any of the descendants of Murong Baoding's branch came to Gusai province to steal military merits in the future, then I'll make sure to beat them up so badly that even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them when they crawled back home. Along the way, as they approached Flying Fox City, there were already several groups of scouts roaming around and spying on them from half a li away. Fatty Dong did not pay any attention to them at all. With these guys' horsemanship and combat strength, any one of the cavalrymen behind him could easily shoot them down. In terms of the killing ability of the horse bars and the scouts, only the white horse wandering crossbows trained by Chen Jibao could compare with his crowbars. Politeness demands reciprocity. After so many years of fighting to the death with real swords and spears, the odds of victory and defeat were always 50-50. Fatty Dong grinned, which made him look even more sinister. He knew that he wasn't a romantic, elegant, and kind person. Before he joined the army, the children in the neighborhood would be scared and cry when they saw him. Other than men who had similar interests, he hadn't been liked by many women or children in his life. Therefore, whenever he met a woman, Fatty Dong would cherish her very much. There were only 2 women, and both of them had become his wives. The outside world said that Fatty Dong treated both the first and second wives equally. Anyway, the one who became the official daughter-in-law of the Dong family first would be the first daughter-in-law, and the one who married into the family later would be the second daughter-in-law. This was called first come, first served. Anyway, this old man didn't like to be reasonable. The one beside me was the sweetheart of that old man, Bu Bang Shan. Wasn't she also taken home by me? Every 2 or 3 days, that old fellow disdained my martial prowess as unsightly. Mother Fastris Kerr, what the hell do you know about the art of war? The pinnacle of martial prowess is no more than fighting 1,000 men. This old man is a match for 10,000 men. I've long disliked you, old man. Don't rely on your father-in-law's status as a martial grandmaster to make a ruckus. This old man respects the old and loves the young. I won't bicker with you. At most, I'll just pat your butt and turn around to tidy up your daughter in the middle of the night. This is called everything has its vanquisher. When the woman beside Fatty Dong saw that all too familiar smiling face, she helplessly said, "Husband, are you up to no good again? Who's going to suffer this time?" The damned Fatty laughed and said, "Your husband has always won people over with virtue and has always been kind to others." The beautiful woman with wide sleeves that fluttered like an immortal from the heavens wrinkled her brows. "You like that Tao man with so much? In the future, you probably won't be so nervous about the children of me and that person, right?" Fatty Dong chuckled and said, "You're treating me like an outsider. Tao Manwu is the only child that your husband truly likes in this life. He's also eldest brother's orphan. What's wrong with feeling a little heartache? It's fine if you don't get along with the princess of Great Yong. It's normal for women to be jealous. But it's not good for you to be blindly jealous of a child. If there's no one around, your husband will have to serve you according to the family rules and spank your butt." The woman whose father was the mountain chieftain of Mount Banbing originally wanted to snort coldly to express her slight dissatisfaction. However, she saw that he had been rushing day and night, resting every day only because he was exhausted and had no choice but to take a nap. Wiping his face with a wet cloth could wipe away several layers of dust, and his lips had long since become chapped and dripping with blood. In order to find that young niece of his who had gone missing from the Duckhead Green Inn, he had mobilized almost all of his connections and resources to rely on the bits and pieces of information that he had found, desperately chasing after clues. This was the first time she had seen him muster such an unscrupulous force other than fighting wars and abducting wives. Seeing his thin and sunken cheeks, her heart softened, and she couldn't bear to use words to oppose him. She changed the topic. Seeing the soldiers in armor outside the city gates, she narrowed her eyes and softly asked, "Isn't Tantai Zhongping your good brother in private? Why did he obstruct you?" Chapter 456. Fatty Dong yawned. He was very familiar with digging holes for the border generals and not burying them. Maybe it would take a few years for them to realize what had happened. If they wanted to scold this sinister and cunning Fatty again, they would not have the heart to do so. However, Fatty Dong had always been honest with his wife. He explained, "If Chongping was an official in the Southern Dynasty, it would be a good thing to be close to me. But if he went to the imperial tent and flirted with me again, His Majesty the Emperor wouldn't mind, but the Yelu and Murong families would gossip. It would not be a good thing after all. I might as well use a trick that could not fool the old fox but could fool many idiots. At least everyone's face would be okay. At the same time, I would let the North know that there was a young man in Flying Fox City who dared to compete with Fatty Dong. The position of Prince Chuan would be set in stone. You've been spoiled by your father. You don't like to use your brain and are much more stupid than her. Wife, don't glare at me. I know that your eyes are beautiful. Back then, I was mesmerized by your gaze and lost my soul. Besides, it's good to be stupid. Everyone is as smart as her. As her husband, I am tired. It's better to be stupid. Let me give you an example. Let me say this first. It's just a big example. My husband and his brothers went to a brothel to drink wine. When he returned home, she smelled the wine and wanted him to kneel on a washboard. You, on the other hand, were happy with the rouge your husband bought. Tell me, which one do you think I like more?" The woman smiled sweetly, but there was a murderous intent in her smile. Fatty Dong slapped his own mouth. Therefore, the good show that was originally planned to fight dozens of rounds with Tantai Zhongping turned into the future Prince Chuan of the Bell being knocked off his horse by the flower stuck in cow dung. When Fatty Dong entered the city, he sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Brother Chongping. It's all your sister-in-law's fault for being in a bad mood." The woman's expression did not change at all. She asked softly, "Husband, how do we find your niece next?" Fatty Dong went out of the city gate. He used his hand to block the sunlight and said calmly, "Seal the city. Then scour the city. When you find me, you will leave the city." The woman said worriedly, "Husband, aren't you afraid of attracting criticism?" Fatty Dong curled his lips and sneered, "If anyone is not convinced, then come and argue with me. I will slowly reason with them. If I can't win, then I will crush them with my cavalry." The two bodyguards behind him were closer. When they heard the general's words, they smiled knowingly. "That's right. Our General Dong didn't have any ink in his stomach, but he liked to pretend to be cultured and reasonable with others. Most of the time, when he couldn't argue with others, he would jump and curse. If he still couldn't vent his anger, he would get physical. The officials of the Southern Dynasty hated this shameless bastard. Especially during the Spring Festival, General Dong, whose calligraphy was distorted like an earthworm, still insisted on showing off his talent. He went through doors and shamelessly asked those Southern Dynasty mansions to hang the Spring Festival couplets he wrote. He knew nothing and made a fool of himself. Once, the supervisor and the observer of the Southern Dynasty played tricks. One said that the wind blew away the Spring Festival couplets, while the other said that the couplets were ruined by setting off firecrackers. In the end, the next day, Fatty Dong carried 2 Spring Festival couplets on his shoulders and went to hang them on the doors of 2 powerful military officials. He personally glued them with porridge and soup and said with a smile that this time the couplets wouldn't be blown away by the wind or blown away by the firecrackers. In the vast western capital, where there were as many influential officials as there were dogs, only General Huang Songpu dared to directly block this fatty outside the door. The gatekeeper pointed to a stone tablet at the door. It clearly stated that Dong Zhuo was not allowed to come within 50 steps of the mansion. In the northern Mang and southern dynasties, perhaps other than the border soldiers, only Great General Lu Gui was close to this repulsive fatty. In the end, Great General Lu Gui had the intention of betrothing his granddaughter to him 2 years ago, but the fatty used the fact that he had a fierce wife as an excuse. In the end, he married the Mountain Lord's only daughter a few days later. It was rumored that the old General Lu Gui was so furious that his hair stood on end, nearly donning his armor and mounting his horse to slaughter this black-bellied fatty. The woman said softly, "If you knew this would happen, why didn't you personally escort sister-in-law and niece to Luqing?" Fatty Dong said gloomily, "That sister-in-law doesn't seem like a woman who can stay a widow for Brother Tao. I've never been close to her, so why would I want to see her? Right after Brother Tao died, she wrote to me to ask for a list of official titles for her son. I have a strange temper. If you ask for it, I won't give it to you. If you don't ask for it, I don't mind helping you pave the way. Brother Tao only has one son. If she raises him, sooner or later he'll become a playboy who eats, drinks and plays. He's not promising at all. If it were up to me, he would have been thrown into my army. If he could survive and become a member of the Crow's Nest, he'd have your Uncle Dong Zhuo's wealth, and he'd have a bright future. But would that woman be willing to do that? Wouldn't she be worried to death and stab me in the back? That nephew's temperament doesn't follow Brother Tao's, but his mother's. Therefore, I only like young man Wu. I, Dong Zhuo, swore that I wouldn't visit old Corporal Wu until I became a first-class general or minister in Beimang." Fatty Dong snorted coldly. "As long as I find young man Wu, I'll make sure that my youngest daughter can live more freely than any princess or infanta. Whoever dares to bully her must be tired of living." The woman rubbed her black hair and said softly, "From the news, it's a young man with a saber who's traveling in Dragon Waste State who kidnapped young man Wu. When you meet him, how are you going to deal with him?" Fatty Dong's expression eased a little, and he said with a smile, "I don't care who he is or what his identity is. As long as he doesn't let young man Wu down, as long as he dares to ask, I'll dare to pay him." The woman from Bubang Mountain said with a smile, "That's what I like about my husband." Fatty Dong laughed and said, "Wife, I like a lot of things about you." The woman, who was born to live at the top of Jianghu and enjoyed the scenery, was born to be indifferent to the world. Only to Fatty Dong, who was her nemesis, she threw a coquettish glance that only showed her true love. Fatty Dong squinted his eyes and looked at the city. He didn't like this flying fox city. It was too effeminate and annoying. When the cavalry entered the city, they didn't go straight to the mayor's mansion. Instead, they symbolically circled the city and passed by a restaurant in the northeast corner. The woman suddenly turned her head and looked at the window upstairs. Fatty Dong wondered, "What's the matter?" The woman thought for a while and shook her head. Fatty Dong thought that there was a playboy who coveted his wife and didn't take it seriously. If it was a normal day, he could beat him to death. But now, he really didn't have the mood to do so. He only brought 100 cavalry, and he couldn't look for young man Wu all over the city like a headless fly. In the end, he still needed the help of the government. Dong Zhuo exhaled a long breath and said softly, "Young man Wu, wait for Uncle Dong for a while. F***CK, that damn Win8 system, it made me lose 2,000 words of my manuscript. This one should have been 6,000 words. The next chapter will be at 2 or 3 in the morning." Chapter 457. The blind storyteller had to tell the story of the heir of Baelyong's travels 3 times a day. 3 times was already the limit of the old man's physical strength. No matter how stubborn he was, he couldn't compete with the heavens. Maybe one day the heavens would be unhappy and take his life. Moreover, the storyteller could only move his lips and drink a few mouthfuls of wine to moisten his throat. His granddaughter, who played the pipa, had to suffer a lot. Her life was poor and she couldn't bear to spend money to use the peach rubber finger protector. After only one storytelling session, the little girl's 10 fingers were bruised and blue. Now that she was resting, she was afraid that her grandfather would be worried, so she only dared to secretly rub the corners of her clothes to ease the pain in her fingers. The shopkeeper of the tea house saw the second group of customers enter the tea house in high spirits. They sat behind the counter and happily sipped tea from the spout. Doing a small business related to eating was all about the flow of people. If the old customers didn't leave, the new customers wouldn't come. The shopkeeper subconsciously glanced at the customers at the table by the window, and no longer paid attention to them. The old scholar seemed to have made up his mind to listen to another storytelling session. He tactfully asked for a pot of tea from the tea house's waiter. He didn't drink much, but most of the tea was smeared on the table by him. The man with the sword didn't look sideways. He was like a clay bodhisattva in a small temple. His chi cultivation was first class. The old scholar smiled and said, "Xiaopu, want to drink a cup?" The middle-aged man shook his head and respectfully said, "I don't dare." The old scholar seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. He pointed at the junior and said, "Evenly Mibby dared to openly assassinate him. Is there anything in the world that you, son Xiaopu, don't dare to do?" The man with the sword didn't smile, nor did he know how to joke. He said seriously, "Then let's drink a cup." The old scholar shook his head and said, "I won't let you drink, you idiot." The old man rubbed his cheeks and said slowly, "I scolded Old Li for having evil intentions and wanting to bring disaster to Bei Mang for 100 years. He scolded me for being pedantic and unworthy of being the emperor's teacher. These are all disputes in the court under the emperor's eyes. They are all on the table and can barely be called disputes between gentlemen. Xiaopu, don't go to Li Mibi's side in the future. A saber only has a single edge and its foundation is biased. Therefore it is a sharp weapon for killing people. A sword, however, has two peaks and is neither biased nor biased. A gentleman entering the world to save people is the correct path of the sword. In a dynasty, both sides complement each other. There is no lack of martial artists who wield sabers and swords who wield swords. You are the master of the sword mansion of the chess and sword music school after all. If you personally fight and kill, the school will lose its glory. You have to rely on the talented juniors to earn your reputation. You have to rely on the support of the few of you. Just as the storyteller said, Li Chungang is the #1 in the way of the sword. In my opinion, this sword god's sheathed sword has thousands of sword wills in his heart even if he doesn't draw his sword. He is far more perfect than the two-sleeved green snake and the sword that opens the gate of heaven. Xiaopu, you should learn from him. The middle-aged man nodded. He was only convinced by one person in his life. The old man left Bei Mang alone and rushed to the south before the situation of the Central Plains was settled. After the unification of the spring and autumn period, he stayed in the foreign land where the smoke of war gradually dissipated for a full 20 years. The man with the sword was famous for his sword chi. Hong Jingyan, who was at the top of the martial arts ranking, was his closed-door disciple. The old scholar listened to the next two storytellers without missing a word, sometimes nodding and sometimes shaking his head. In any case, no one except for a rather dignified swordsman sitting at the same table would care about the life or death of an ordinary-looking, stinky scholar. During this period, two groups of ruffians from Flying Fox City came to make trouble. The first group was sent back by the tea house manager with money. The second group was much more vicious. The old storyteller, who was fiercely protecting his granddaughter holding the pipa, was punched in the face. As a result, the crowd was outraged. The customers paid for their tea and waited to hear a few good stories. You ruffians can be unreasonable, but don't hit the old man's face. If you hurt him, wouldn't you have wasted your copper coins to buy tea and listen to the storyteller? The ruffians said harshly. If they dared to boast about how heroic the heir of Bailiang was again, they would come back and give them a good beating. Then they swaggered away. At the end of the third storytelling session, a few handsome horses came to the outside of the tea house. A few disciples of the Flying Fox town jumped off the horses and rushed at the blind old man with 6 or 7 evil servants. A disciple of an official's family even pulled the little girl's hair with a ferocious smile and threatened to throw the little young barbarian into the lowest brothel to be a whore. The old scholar's face was as usual. People fight with people, and each depends on his own ability. Life and death are predestined. This old man wants to make a fuss about the fight between officials and people. Xiaopu. In an instant, the man with a sword on his back who heard the order did not unsheath his sword, but the sword chi was close. The old scholar did not look at the bloody scene. He stretched out his sleeve to wipe off the map of the border between the two dynasties that was densely covered like an ant's nest on the table. He whispered in a hoarse voice, "In the past 20 years, I have been a businessman who haggled over every penny, a farmer who lost his home, a night watchman, a henchman who buried himself in writing documents for the officials, a writer for the famous prostitutes in the brothel, an escort who traveled north and south, a writer for the famous scholars, a county magistrate in a small town, and so on. I have done all kinds of things. I have also traveled through the 9 kingdoms of the spring and autumn period. If I spend another 2 or 3 years traveling through the 8 provinces of Bei Mang, I can probably go to the Imperial City and play a big chess game for His Majesty. The old scholar said flatly, Huang Sanjia, you use the 9 kingdoms of the Central Plains as a chessboard, and I use the 2 dynasties to divide black and white. You are about to lose 1 rank. The old scholar suddenly laughed and said, You already have 1 foot in the coffin, yet you are still so focused on winning. It's not good. In the inn, Su Fengnian saw Tao Manwu, who had just stood on tiptoe to look outside the window, suddenly shrink back as if she had seen a ghost in broad daylight. She trotted to the bedside, took off her boots, and jumped to his side. She hugged the strange box with a complicated expression on her little face. Su Fengnian joked, What? You didn't really see your Uncle Dong, did you? That doesn't make sense. If it were me, I would have already shouted and jumped down the stairs. The little girl raised the box in her hand and tilted her head. She said timidly and seriously, If the little spiders in the box spin a web tomorrow, you have to promise me one thing, okay? Su Fengnian bluntly refused. Do you think I am stupid? If you want me to meet your Uncle Dong who has outstanding military achievements, or if you want me to carry that money bag in the future, do you think I will agree? The little girl was still holding the small wooden box, about to cry. Su Fengnian said angrily, Go away, don't try to seduce me. There really isn't such a beautiful girl in the world. After hesitating for a moment, Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, Even if there is, it is not a silly girl like you who is only 4, 5, 6, or 7 years old. Su Fengnian wanted to get out of bed to see what was going on, but he found that she was tugging on his sleeve. He looked down and saw that the little girl's eyes were wet, as if a flood was about to burst out of a dam. Su Fengnian had a keen sense of hearing. Naturally, he could tell that it was the movement of 100 elite cavalries crossing the street outside the building. There were very few people in the Flying Fox City who were qualified to make such a big move. Tantai Zhongping was one of them. However, the eldest son of the city's official had always been reserved, so he would not bring an army to the northeast corner of the city to show off. Connecting this to Tao Manwu's strange expression, the truth was revealed. She was just an ignorant little girl who had only known each other for less than a month, so what kind of unforgettable feelings could there be? Su Fengnian felt like she would just suffer a bit of pain for a while. Once she saw that Uncle Dong who had a meteoric rise in Northern Mang's political arena, it wouldn't take long for her to forget about him. Just how many odes of undying love were nothing more than this. In reality, the two of them were entangled in gratitude and grudges, one big and one small. This kind of affection couldn't withstand a few blows of wind and rain. Chapter 458. Su Fengnian did not expose the truth that was close to the truth. He said softly, I intend to entrust you to Tantai Chang'an. Later, I will ask shopkeeper Sun to take you to the bottle alley. Stay in Shi first. After that, you can tell the second son of the city overseer to come to the restaurant for a meal. It was hard to tell whether the second son of the city overseer was a loser or not. However, according to Tantai Chang'an's temperament, he would probably treat a little girl who could not cause any trouble well. Of course, this was not a foolproof plan. However, Su Fengnian could only do this because of the situation. As for whether Tao Manwu would reveal his identity or give Tantai Chang'an to Fatty Dong after getting along for a period of time, it would be a good thing for the city overseer's mansion and the little girl. Su Fengnian was destined to go deep into the hinterland of Beimang alone, and even to the distant northern region. It was impossible for him to take a little girl to the end of the world. It was not a fun thing to do. Maybe one day she would become a burden and be abandoned as an abandoned child. Finally, she would die under unknown weapons. No matter how Su Fengnian agreed with the hypocrisy of the world and how cruel and ruthless he was, he did not think it was a trivial matter to watch her die an unnatural death. The little girl turned her head and said angrily, No, I won't tell you if I go. I'll be a mute. Su Fengnian smiled and said, It's up to you whether you go or not. The little girl nodded heavily. Su Fengnian flicked her forehead and said, You will hate me one day. Then you will know how hard it is to part peacefully now. Tao Manwu picked up the porcelain pillow and wanted to hit the big bad guy. However, when he saw his eyes, he did not dare to do so. He was afraid that he would cry out loud. The little girl turned over and threw herself on the bed. First, she hugged the porcelain pillow and Chi Chiao under her body. Then, she hurriedly covered her body with the quilt and hid to sob secretly. I hate you right now, she said in a soft and indistinct voice. She wanted to cry and scold him, and she was also sulking under the quilt. The little girl must be very tired. Su Fengnian waited for a while. Seeing that she did not stop, he sighed, took the quilt and threw it aside. Then he held her in his arms and put his chin on her head. He said softly, "Don't you want to see your Uncle Dong every day and want him to teach me a lesson? Why are you so shy when you see him? Now." The little girl covered her face and her slender shoulders gently twitched. She said intermittently, "Uncle Dong is a good man. I won't let him beat you." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Fighting or not is a small matter." He did not continue. Since the fatty Dong Zhuo had entered Flying Fox City with 100 cavalrymen, Su Fengnian would not only be afraid of him but also want to kill him. Killing Dong Zhuo would have a more far-reaching impact than killing 10 Tao Chenji. However, since the fatty was an important minister of the Southern Dynasty, Su Fengnian was not interested in whether the little spider in the little girl's Chi Chao box spun a web. However, the Beimeng spider web behind the fatty was very likely to slowly spread out inside and outside Flying Fox City. Su Fengnian wanted to kill a popular military official who must be protected by men of sacrifice and retreat successfully. Without the Finger Mystery Realm, it was impossible for him to succeed. Thinking of this, Su Fengnian felt a little guilty. What did the little girl do in her last life to meet him in this life? Tao Manwu said softly, "My father said that if a deserter on the battlefield, he would be beheaded." Su Fengnian pinched her cheek and spat, "Don't say such unlucky things." After a long silence, Tao Manwu cried until she had no strength left. She clutched the sleeves of the big bad guy, afraid that he would leave. Su Fengnian looked at the bag of money on the table and said while rubbing his forehead, Okay. I owe you this. Our Taozi is so beautiful. Maybe she will be kidnapped by a scoundrel and become his wife. I don't feel at ease. Let's make a deal first. I will send you to Uncle Dong's place." Outside the courier station in Flying Fox City, Dong Zhuo, who had just rested for a short time, ran out with his eyes wide open. He was surprised and stunned. He had searched high and low for something, but found it without any effort. This general, who had been sealed by the city overseer, saw a funny scene. A young man holding his little niece's hand with one hand and an inferior horse with the other hand appeared in front of him unexpectedly and unreasonably. Young man Wu was carrying a heavy bag and holding a porcelain pillow with one hand. She bit her lips and looked very wronged. Dong Zhuo's heart and liver were broken. Fortunately, young man Wu was safe. Dong Zhuo looked at him carefully. This fat fox who had been dealing with the old foxes in the military and political circles all year round, had already cultivated a good sense of human nature. His eyes were like torches. He immediately felt jealous like a father who saw his daughter bring a damned son-in-law to his house. Damn it, his little daughter was not even 10 years old. How could this bastard kill her? The fairy who came out of the Bing Mountains squinted at the young man who she could not see clearly. He was empty-handed and had nothing on him. There was a long cloth bag tied near the saddle of the inferior horse, which should be a weapon similar to a broadsword. The more she could not figure out, the more she dared not take it lightly. Her family was well learned, her martial arts were good, and her eyesight was superb. She was not sure whether this calm young man was at level 3 or level 2. But when she saw her husband's embarrassed look, she felt relieved. She had seen her husband bully others many times, but this was the first time. Since this uninvited guest dared to bring young man Wu here, unless he was a reckless and lousy assassin like a moth darting into the flame, he was most likely a guest and not an enemy. She could not keep a straight face. After marrying into the Dong family, she had always kept in mind her mother's advice on the mountain. In addition to knowing how to turn a blind eye, she must make her husband proud. This was a smart woman. Tao Manwu looked back 3 times with every step. Su Fengnian turned over and mounted the horse. Fatty Dong laughed and said, "This hero who did a good deed without leaving his name, is he going out of the city?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. Fatty Dong rubbed his hands and said, "If there is something that is hard to say, it is not Dong Zhuo who is boasting. As long as it is not a big crime of rebellion, I can help you to intercede. If you don't like Dong Zhuo's reputation, it is not a problem. Dong Zhuo will remember today's kindness for the rest of his life." Seeing this young man slowly turn the horse's head, it seemed that he was determined to go out of the city. Dong Zhuo did not bother to be polite and said loudly, "Go to the city gate and pass a message. Open the city gate and let them go." Watching the man and the horse go away, Fatty Dong ran to Tao Manwu with a funny posture. Because he was too tall and burly, he simply knelt down and hugged the little girl. His wife wanted to say something but stopped. Dong Zhuo picked up young Man Wu and put him on his shoulder to sit. He turned around and said with a smile, "I know what you want to say." Such a person left as he pleased. Of course, I am very vigilant. However, it is better to do less immoral things like repaying kindness with evil. I have done enough shameful things in my life. If I give birth to a son who doesn't have a penis, who can I complain to? You two wives will beat me up from 200 pounds to 100 pounds. Do you think it is easy for me to gain a pound of flesh? The woman smiled gracefully. The young man was generous, but compared to her, a narrow-minded man, he was still thousands of miles away. Dong Zhuo looked around and his eyes suddenly turned cold. He said gloomily, "Everyone, I have said that I will let them go, so I will let them go. You are watching me. I am in the wrong to bring my private army out of Gusai State. Moreover, I have my wife to comfort me along the way. I will bear with it. If you dare to trip that person up and do something unnecessary, don't blame me, Dong Zhuo, for being narrow-minded. I will even dig up the graves of your ancestors." After he finished speaking, Fat Man Dong asked in a soft voice, "Wife, is it appropriate to use superfluous words like drawing legs on a snake here?" The woman was used to it. She nodded and said, "It's okay." Almost at the same time, Su Fengyan and Dong Zhuo, these two men, turned their heads and looked at each other from a distance. If they met again, they did not know what kind of status they would have when they looked at each other. Announcing the first VIP subscription group in Snow. 1687165 group subscription screenshot. Chapter 459. When the people of Flying Fox City first heard that Dong Zhongping was going to seal the city, they wanted to cut off the fat man's flesh. However, the thunder was loud but the rain was small. Soon the city was reopened. The people thought that the eldest son of Tantai Zhongping must have gained the upper hand in the secret competition with Dong Zhongping. They didn't believe that Tantai Zhongping would be pushed back by a woman at the gate. Su Fengyan was not in a hurry to leave the city. Instead, he climbed the city wall and looked at the hanging sword pavilion from a distance. Because Tao Manwu was involved with Dong Zhuo, his plan had been disrupted. It was not appropriate to leave the city in a hurry. However, if he stayed in the city, it would be easier for him to be caught. Su Xiao wanted to find the old general of the Bailiang army by himself, so he had to put it aside for the time being. It was the lesser of two evils. He was mocking himself, but he still had some regrets. When Su Fengyan was about to turn around and walk down the city wall, a sloppy man who was sleeping soundly on the battlement murmured a few words. He then rolled sideways and was about to fall off the city wall. Fortunately, he fell into the wall, so Su Fengyan did not help him. The drunkard was not happy that he survived. Instead, he carefully stroked the wine gourd hanging on his waist. Only then did he raise his head and look around. When he saw Su Fengyan, he was indifferent. The drunkard with a full beard leaned against the wall and drank a mouthful of strong wine. He hummed a Bailiang song, "Take off his armor," leisurely. A tall but hunchbacked man in a servant's uniform trotted up the city wall with a flask of wine in his hand. When he saw Su Fengyan, he paused and silently filled his old half-empty flask with new wine. The servant was a pitiful cross-eyed man. The half-drunk man took out a dagger inlaid with pearls and shaved his face. As he was busy, he glanced sideways at Su Fengyan. He pointed at the hanging sword pavilion and scolded, "Young man, what are you looking at? I brought 2 swords to Flying Fox City. One is hung in the pavilion, and the other is sold to the city lord's mansion for 1,000 taels of gold. What right do you have to look at me like I'm a drunkard?" The servant was a mute. Seeing his master's lips, he knew that he was about to get into trouble again. He hurriedly turned to Su Fengyan to apologize. Su Fengyan smiled and waited for the drunkard to shave off his beard. He narrowed his eyes. No wonder he could sleep on the top of Feng Feng Lu for so many years when he was selling swords and painting. If his clothes were clean and tidy, he must have been a romantic and elegant man. There must be something wrong. Su Fengyan's expression was the same as usual. He leisurely looked at the top scorer of the brothel who could make such a beautiful girl unable to forget him. The drunkard took back his dagger and sighed. "I didn't let down the painting, but the painting misled me." He drank another mouthful of wine. Su Fengyan was not in the mood to beat around the bush. He asked directly, "Are you waiting for me?" The drunkard glanced at the servant as if he had heard a joke. He laughed and said, "Kid, you're talking big. I'm sleeping here comfortably. It's more like you're looking for me." Su Fengnian was desperate. He said calmly, "Someone asked me to pass a message. If you can understand it, then forget it. If you don't, then take it as a drunkard's words. They can go in one ear and out the other. Since he's a pawn you brought out, you have to go back and clean up his mess." The man who was still handsome after shaving rolled his eyes and said, "Is there something wrong with your head? When did I not clean up my mess after taking a dump? Get lost, get lost. If you don't get lost, I still have my swordsmanship. I'll take out the torch dragon hanging in the sword pavilion and send you to hell." Su Fengnian had checked the flow of qi. Neither the master nor the servant could be called a hermit master. The drunkard was barely above ordinary people. As for the cross-eyed servant, he was slightly inferior to ordinary people. Su Fengnian walked down the city wall with a smile. He took the inferior horse and left Flying Fox City. He looked back. There was no drunkard. There was only the cross-eyed servant standing there with a hunched back. The drunkard, who had been sitting on the ground and leaning against the wall, wiped the stubble on his cheeks and muttered to himself. Seeing that there was no response, he looked up and saw the servant standing there silently. The drunkard said self-deprecatingly, "I forgot that you're deaf and mute. When I was chased by my enemies, I ran north and fled to the border. If you didn't have some money, I wouldn't be willing to call you master and servant." The drunkard asked lazily, "Why do you want me to sleep on the city wall today?" A hoarse voice sounded, "Even a cripple like me can sense the sword energy approaching. There's a swordsman in Bei Mang who has such a sword realm. He must be someone like the headmaster of the chess and sword music school." The drunkard was so scared that his hands and feet trembled. He asked dumbfoundedly, "You can talk?" The hunched servant was still looking into the distance. He reached out to touch his face and said calmly, "It's just a self-sealing acupoint. It's the best withered sword technique of the Wu family. Years ago, I had a sword competition with Li Chun Gang. Then, I was disheartened that the general didn't want to be the emperor. So, I practiced the withered sword in peace. My ancestor once defeated 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords. 4 broken swords were left in Bei Mang. So, I thought of coming here to take a look. Otherwise, with your mediocre swordsmanship, how could you pick up a fish spear and a torch dragon? Do you think famous swords are copper coins? You can pick up a few in the downtown area?" The drunkard asked in a trembling voice. "Who are you?" The servant's fingernails drew blood on his face. He seemed to hate this face and said slowly, "The withered sword is emotionless. Wu Su was tainted by love. Even if she pretended to enter the secular world, her sword intent was not pure. She was an immortal on Earth in the palace back then, but it was only a fake realm. It was just an illusion. Otherwise, how could she fall ill?" Consort of the King of Bailiang. My sister. My biological sister. However, I have never been close to her since I was young. Our relationship is even worse than her relationship with Dong Tai, who lived on Sword Mountain. Just like Chen Zhibao and me, His Royal Highness is much better than that nephew of mine. However, no matter how close we are, our blood relationship cannot be denied. All these years, I have been waiting for the general. I never thought that my nephew would come to Flying Fox City. General, you moved me with emotion and reason. But don't you know that I, Wu Qi, am the most emotionless and unreasonable person in my life? How do you know that Chen Zhibao has never come to find me? It's too late. You don't kill me. I won't say anything. There are so many romantic people, but they all die because of romantic people. On this day, the top scholar died drunk in Sword Pavilion. All the brothels in the city mourned and paid for the burial of this legendary man who made countless girls fall in love with him. Those middle-aged women whose children had already grown up were secretly grieving. To the north of Bailiang was Bei Mang. Bailiang was desolate, but its heart was not cold. In the past few years, the battles in Liangmang had not been as grand. Most of the battles were between small groups of roaming cavalry. Bailiang's crossbowmen had become the most coveted type of soldier. To be able to cut off a few heads and hang them on the side of the saddle, even the old soldiers would be envious. Not to mention the hot-blooded new soldiers. This was a real meritorious service and could not be faked. Those rich playboys on the Eastern Front might even kill civilians and pass them off as Bei Mang barbarians. Bailiang's military law was strict, so they would not dare to do such a thing. One day, a group of Baelyong's crossbowmen went deep into the Baemang's territory and met with more than 20 strong and healthy Baemang barbarians on a narrow path. After a fierce battle, both sides suffered losses. After checking the corpses, they found out that they were Crow barbarians under Dong Zhuo's command. This made the ordinary crossbowman, Li Hanlin, whose face was covered in blood, cry out in joy, but he also felt some lingering fear. Baelyong's military system consisted of 10 to 50 men. To be able to be a crossbowman's commander was more qualified than a general in the military. Li Hanlin's commander was an old and steady burly man. He wore light armor and his horsemanship was superb. Not only did he have extraordinary strength, he could also draw a bow with both hands and shoot. However, no matter how calm he was, whenever he saw a Baemang person, his eyes would turn red. He had broken many military rules and had been demoted several times. Otherwise, he would have become a general long ago. He was a man of few words, but every time his subordinates mentioned the incident where he was personally whipped by the general, the middle-aged man would grin. Li Hanlin and the other crossbowmen all knew that this was the commander's weakness. If they made a mistake, as long as they repeated this, the commander would be happy and soft-hearted. Li Hanlin rode on a horse with a deep wound on his arm. A Baemang barbarian's head was tied to his buttocks. Blood flowed down the side of the horse's back. In this small-scale battle, they had lost 3 men and completely wiped out the enemy. The 3 corpses of their comrades were hung on the backs of the marksmen and 2 deputy marksmen's horses. This was an unshakable rule in the army. On the battlefield of Baelyong, the most important thing was to return the corpses of the dead. As long as there was still a breath left in them, they had to return with their fallen comrades as long as it didn't affect the important military affairs. Li Hanlin glanced at the new recruit beside him and had a whole new level of respect for him. This guy was called Lu Do, a weird-looking man with double pupils. Not long after he joined their ranks, he had 3 Baemang barbarians' heads hanging from his horse's back. One could imagine how powerful he was. Originally, the crossbowmen led by Li Hanlin didn't like this bad-tempered new recruit. However, after fighting side by side with him, even the one behind him who had beaten and scolded Lu Do Li October had to admit that he was wrong. This old man with the surname Li was a 3rd-ranked general in Baelyong. In the whole of Baelyong, he could be considered to be someone who could do whatever he wanted. His parents and uncles were all illiterate. When he was born, his parents made a big fuss over his name. They invited countless famous scholars, but none of them were satisfied with his name. Later, the old man slapped his thigh and said that he should be called Lu Do since he was born in Baelyong. As a result, the entire illiterate family didn't have any objections. The scholars who helped him with the name were all silent. Chapter 460. Most of the crossbowmen in Li Hanlin's team were young masters like October Li, although most of them were not as prominent as October Li, but they were not willing to talk about the glory of their father's family, so October Li became an isolated outlier and was very unlikable. When Lu Do, a commoner from a concubine family, entered the team, he had a conflict with October Li on the same day. At that time, Li Hanlin and the others were indifferent and did not take sides with either side. When they saw Lu Do's cowardly attitude, they rolled their eyes and thought that no matter how useless he was to become a crossbowman, he should at least have some backbone. Unexpectedly, when he fought with the crows who had long been famous for their fierceness, with real swords and spears, Lu Do, a taciturn man, killed 3 crows without saying a word and even blocked a tricky arrow for October Li. Li Hanlin also had a higher opinion of October Li. Although October Li still had some of his foppish habits, it was not too much. Compared to the descendants of the Northern Liang generals who did not even dare to enter the Northern Liang army, let alone become crossbowmen, October Li was really 1,000 times more promising. At this time, October Li was joking with the crossbowmen, saying that when he was young, he always fought with his brothers at home. His father had heard from somewhere that there was strength in numbers and wanted him to break chopsticks. However, he was so strong that he broke more than 10 chopsticks in one go. His father, who could not explain the reason, was so angry that he invited a real martial arts instructor instead of making him play with words. Li Hanlin thought that October Li was really lucky. At this time, October Li was joking with the crossbowmen, saying that he always fought with his brothers when he was young. Li Hanlin was amused when he heard Li October say that making him study was worse than being stabbed. He felt the same way and his mood became better. When Brother Feng said that he should join the army, it was indeed a good thing. However, this good brother of His Royal Highness probably did not expect that he would become a crossbowman. Li October rode up from behind and said with a smile, "Brother Hanlon, can I borrow the barbarian's head when we enter the city? It's just so I can show off." Li Hanlon laughed and scolded, "Go borrow it from Lu Do. That brat cut off 3 heads and I only have 1. What will you do if I lend it to you?" Li October said helplessly, "I just lowered my head and apologized to him. I don't have the face to borrow from him. Besides, both of our surnames are Li. We were a family 500 years ago." Li Hanlon yelled, "Lu Do, October Li wants to borrow a barbarian's head from you to show off. Do you want to lend it to me?" Lu Do said calmly, "Not a single one." October Li had a bitter expression on his face. Even the bid leaders and deputy bid leaders burst into laughter. The corners of Lu Do's mouth twitched as he said indifferently, "I'll lend you 2. October Li turned his horse around and wanted to hug this cold-faced but warm-hearted guy. "Lu Do, you'll be my brother after this. When we reach Lingzhou, I'll take you to visit all the brothels." Li Hanlon teased, "What's the big deal about visiting a brothel? Don't you have a younger sister who's always praised as a captivating beauty? Why don't you just acknowledge him as your brother-in-law? In the future, you can even borrow 200 barbarian heads, let alone 2. October Li said heroically, "Sure, Lu Do. Why don't we agree on this?" Lu Do rolled his eyes and said, "Get lost. With your shabby appearance, how good can your sister be?" October Li, who didn't look ugly at all, was instantly annoyed and caused another round of hearty laughter. The bid leader said, "A bunch of brats. You still have the energy to talk nonsense here. Don't you know how to vent your energy on the bellies of your women later? I see that your trip this time wasn't bad. When we return to the city, I'll shamelessly ask for a leave from General Zhao and let you guys enjoy yourselves. However, it'll only be for a day or 2 at most. If anyone dares to come to the camp late by even a moment, I'll personally whip you." Li Hanlon came to the bid leader's side and said softly, "Bid leader, I've already discussed with Hong Jin and the others. We'll each give a barbarian's head to the 3 brothers. As for the reward, it'll all be given to their families." The bid leader frowned and said, "It's a serious crime to give away military merits without authorization. Li Hanlon, I know your background isn't ordinary and isn't inferior to October Li and the others. However, if the higher-ups find out about this, the military law will be like a mountain. A happy occasion will become a disaster. Do you really dare?" Li Hanlon said with a mischievous smile. "Back then, Chief Biao dared to stab a northern Mang general to death with a single blade. Just how heroic was that? We are all pawns you brought out, so why wouldn't we dare?" The bid leader cursed and said with a gratified smile, "You guys don't need to get involved. I've already discussed this with the 2 deputy bids. You guys have no part in this. You just need to focus on killing the enemy and accumulating military merits. Since you've entered our ranks, I and the 2 deputy bids have no reason to treat you unfairly. In the Bailiang army, a day's worth of comrades, a lifetime's worth of brothers. On Mount Wudong, the morning bell rang. On the summit of the 81 peaks, in the square in front of the main peak's Taoist temple. When Marshal Grand Uncle Qing became the chief, he was the one who led the practice. However, the chief was no longer in this world. Someone else was in charge of the practice, but he was just as young. Li Yufu was only 1 generation younger than the Chief Hong, but he was even younger. The summit was filled with smoke. Hundreds of Wudong Taoists practiced together. Their robes fluttered in the wind and clouds surged. The 108 styles created by the young chief were simplified into 72 styles by Marshal Grand Uncle Li Yufu. Not only did they not lose the essence of Taoism, but they also became more complete. Even a Taoist child who just came up the mountain could do the same without any difficulty. After Wudong closed the mountain, only pilgrims were allowed to enter the mountain to burn incense. The Taoist temple on the mountain didn't care about the height of the peak. The Taoists on the mountain didn't care about their seniority. As long as they were willing, they could practice with Li Yufu twice a day. Those who arrived early could stand in the front row. Senior Marshal Grand Uncle Song Jiming and Yu Xingrui could casually stand in the back row if they arrived later. Regardless of wind and rain, they practiced on the summit for a day without rest. After the practice, Li Yufu and some young Taoists patiently explained their doubts. Master Yu Xingrui, who had been quietly waiting, walked to the little lotus peak and came to the tortoise camel tablet. The old Taoist whose inner strength was only inferior to big senior martial brother Wang Zhonglo said with emotion, Yufu, do you blame your martial granduncle Hong for not leaving ancestor Lu's sword to you but giving it to the outsider Qi Xianxia? And this person is a Taoist from the Taoist mansion of Dragon Tiger Mountain. Li Yufu put his hands in the cuffs of his Taoist robe and smiled. When martial granduncle taught me this set of boxing, he had already made it clear that he would give ancestor Lu's sword to Dragon Tiger Mountain's Qi Xianxia. He also asked me if I had any worries. Yufu didn't dare to lie, so I told him the truth. Martial granduncle said that if you were not convinced, then you could go to Qi Xianxia and ask for it back if you were to surpass martial granduncle Wang. But I'll tell you in advance that I'll practice swordsmanship halfway. But if I don't have any achievements in the future, you can't laugh at me. Yu Xingrui walked to the edge of the cliff and stepped on the soft soil. He smiled and said, If you don't succeed in practicing swordsmanship, you can't let us laugh at you, can we? Back then, except for the eldest senior brother who cultivated the big yellow court and Wang Xiaoping who practiced the silent sword, the rest of us were useless. The only fun we had was to laugh at your martial granduncle. When we found out that he was reading the forbidden book, we laughed and scolded him. When he dozed off while riding the green ox, we scolded him with a few words of wisdom. Thinking of the red clothes he wore in his youth, we laughed and mocked him. Today, it was not good to go down the mountain for fortune-telling. We old men couldn't help laughing again. In fact, as time went on, your martial granduncle and I felt that it was better not to go down the mountain. What's the point of going down the mountain after becoming the best in the world? But in the end, your martial granduncle still went down the mountain. Yu Xingrui sighed and said in a low voice, riding an ox and reading Taoist books, rowing a waterfall with peach trees, watching the clouds rise and fall among the peaks, let nature take its course. This should be your martial granduncle's way of heaven. But riding a crane down the mountain, cutting fate with a sword, and letting a woman ascend, how can he let nature take its course? If I was there at that time, I would have pulled his ear and scolded him. We old men are not regretting whether Wudong will prosper or not, we just feel sorry for him. Li Yufu murmured, a white-haired person sending off a black-haired person. Yu Xingrui sighed heavily and said with a smile, so you don't have to torment yourself anymore, and don't have any burden. Regarding the matter of Sect Master's junior brother, don't look at how those martial uncles appear to be calm and collected these days. I reckon that they were all in a daze when they were eating. Fortunately, my junior brother Wang wasn't on the mountain. Otherwise, there's an 80 to 90% chance that he would have made a move to stop Shi Xiong's flying sword from opening the heavenly court. And your martial granduncle Song, he can't calm down to practice alchemy for a year. He is very worried. Li Yufu asked softly, is the sect leader the reincarnation of Ancestor Lu and also the reincarnation of Qi Xuanzhen? Yu Xingrui smiled. It's probably true. Who cares? Yu Xingrui patted the shoulder of this disciple who personally came from Donghai to Wudong Mountain and said softly, you have the temperament of the sect leader. It's a blessing to be able to eat and sleep. Li Yufu scratched his head and said awkwardly, when His Royal Highness came up the mountain, sect leader could still suppress this young master. I'm afraid I could only be beaten. Yu Xingrui laughed and said, don't listen to the nonsense of those little Taoists. Your uncle master was also beaten and scolded by the crown prince. When the crown prince went up the mountain to practice his saber skills, your uncle master was bullied quite a bit. Luckily, he was able to find joy in his suffering. The few of us were just gloating. Li Yufu was stunned. Yu Xingrui pointed to the scenery outside the peak and smiled sincerely. The sect leader's junior brother stepped into celestial phenomenon here, and also became an earth immortal here. It's just a matter of one step. Li Yufu came back to his senses and said softly, it seems like one step, but it's already thousands of steps. Chapter 461. Yu Xingrui nodded, that's right. When you are wholeheartedly seeking Tao, you don't know how many steps you've taken. Only when you forget yourself can you have the opportunity to step into Tao. As for how to forget yourself, Master is inflexible and inflexible. He doesn't dare to mislead others, but at least he knows one thing. He works hard every day, but he doesn't forget to calculate how many steps he has taken. This is also where junior brother is wiser than us. I don't seek Tao, but Tao comes naturally. Li Yufu nodded. Tao can't be Tao. Wonderful beyond words. Yu Xingrui slowly left the top of Little Lotus Peak. He glanced back at his disciple who was talking to the green ox and smiled. Since junior brother was Lu Zhu, his last words were equivalent to Lu Zhu's own words. When Wudong thrives, Yu Fu thrives. Jing and Palace. It was said that Princess Pei was focused on meditation and didn't show up for a long time. The already deserted palace became even more desolate. The sky was cloudy but not rainy. It was cold but not cold, as if a woman wanted to say something. The king of Jing and Zhao Hang, who spent half his life in the capital and half in Xiongfan, sat under the eaves of the temple, gently twirling a string of agar-wood prayer beads wrapped around his hand. There was only one person sitting opposite to this great vassal king. It was Lu Su, the young and blind zither player who stabbed himself in the eyes to end his career. He came from a scholarly family and his father's generation were great scholars. However, because he wrote the history of West Chu with a straight pen, the younger generation took advantage of the loophole and was punished by the imperial court. For 10 years, he played the zither for a famous prostitute in a brothel to make a living. For 10 years, he made a living by gambling in Yongzi Alley. Somehow his luck changed. Not only did he enter Jing and Palace, but he also became an important advisor of the father and son. Even today, the young people who were brought into the imperial family from Yongzi Alley still felt like it was a lifetime ago. As the saying goes, a carp jumps over the dragon gate. Thousands of carps fight until their heads bleed, but how many can jump over the dragon gate? Lu Su, who was a criminal, was favored by the king of Jing, Zhao Hang. It was really unexpected. Zhao Hang closed his eyes and turned the prayer beads on his horse to calm his mind. He asked indifferently, Lu Su, do you know why I did not allow you to enter the capital with shower? The blind young man shook his head. I don't know. King of Jing and opened his eyes and looked at the dusky sky. He laughed and said, These days I made you conceal your surname and identity and move you around to become a low-ranking government official. Have you ever complained? Lu Su shook his head and smiled. Lu Su is very content. Zhao Hang turned his head to look at the young scholar. You've come up with 2 strategies and 13 strategies. You're determined to pacify the world for the emperor. The first strategy is to establish the crown prince, the temple oracle, and the removal of the feudal vassals. Shang'er was trembling with fear and was forced by me to bring him to the capital to meet a stranger, incurring the wrath of the emperor. The second strategy is a total of 10 strategies. It only talks about the strategy of using troops to deal with Bei Mang. The first is to talk about the 2 surnames of Bei Mang and the 2 dynasties in the north and south. The second is to predict the intention of Bei Mang to divide their troops. The third is to talk about how to deal with the enemy's attack. The fourth is to prepare horses for the border. The fifth is to mobilize troops and generals. The sixth is to talk about Tu Liao, the seventh is to reconcile with Qin, the eighth is to give away fortune, the ninth is to reclaim Longyao Prefecture, and the 10th is to eliminate Bei Mang. The emperor was furious again. However, Shang'er sent a secret letter back to Xiongfan, saying that even Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang attached great importance to it. Even the old West Chu's grand preceptor, who usually didn't like to praise others, said a few good words in the imperial court. Of these 3 people, Zhang Julu chose to give away fortune to promote righteousness, to pave the way for his own political reform. Gu Jiantang favored the 9th strategy of reclaiming Longyao Prefecture greatly. Meanwhile, Sun Shiji, who was in charge of the province under the sect, even more so accepted the 2 strategies and 13 strategies. Once he praised the 2 strategies, these fellows standing in the main hall all felt ashamed of their inferiority, calling my impostor Shang a great talent in managing the world and helping the people, not the least bit inferior to Grand Secretary Zhang. Zhang Julu was unexpectedly not the least bit angry. Xiao Yan's words were not only not inferior, it was already difficult for him to look up to him. Only then did he suppress the anger on His Majesty's face. In reality, this king understands clearly that of these 2 strategies and 13 strategies, apart from the matter of appointing a crown prince, which violated his reverse scale and made him truly angry, the other 12 strategies, especially the strategy of removing vassals, simply hit the bottom of his heart. Towards this elder brother, this king truly understands him too well. The blind man quietly said, Lu Su's original intention was to wait a few more years, when the dust of the 7th war between the 2 dynasties had settled, before handing over these 2 strategies and 13 strategies. King of Jing and Zhao Hang stopped turning the prayer beads. Lu Su lowered his head a bit. Zhao Hang laughed and said, You are worthy of being called an intelligent person. This king has killed countless idiots. In this lifetime, Only you and a youngster were able to see that this king would press the prayer beads before killing people. But don't worry, I can't bear to kill you. If I did, half of the Jing'an palace would collapse. This time, my killing intent surged only because of my gloomy nature. I don't really want to kill you. This king can't wait until the 7th war is over. He is afraid that he will lose the bet. Lu Su, you are a smart person. Can you guess the meaning of this king's words? Lu Suan clenched his teeth, got up and knelt down. He said in a low voice, if our dynasty loses, the 13 strategies can still benefit Jing'an Palace. But if we win, they will become 2 pieces of useless paper. In this way, His Royal Highness will have no chance of being passed down from generation to generation. Zhao Heng laughed and said, get up and talk. Lu Su got up and sat down again. Zhao Heng said softly, this king has always been unlucky in gambling. Back then, in that big gamble, he lost the world. That's why he asked Xiao Ertsong to move to the capital. It's just a small gamble. People say that small bets are good for the mood. He thinks he can win. Lu Su suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Zhao Heng continued to turn the prayer beads and said with a smile, you thought of it? That's right. If this king doesn't die, or slowly dies of old age, this gamble, even if I, Zhao Heng, win, it will be useless. Xiao won't be able to become king of Jing'an. He will only be demoted by 1 rank and demoted to a duke. Lu Su knelt down again. Was it fun to indirectly kill a duke who had no illness and no disaster? How many lives did a mere aide like Lu Su have? Zhao Heng got up and said, don't kneel. This king only wants 1 person to kneel in front of him. Who is that person? You and I both know it. Of course it won't be you. Prince Jing'an personally helped the blind young man from the estate up. He smiled amiably and said, back then, that person relied on the scholar Sun Ping, who could be considered a peerless scholar, to achieve what he has today. With you, father and son, presumably, we won't be too far behind. Let's go. You've seen the splendor of Jing'an Palace. This king will take you to see some filthy things. Lu Su was brought by the king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, to a secluded private house in the city. After getting out of the carriage, the king of Jing'an, who was the most proficient in both the pen and the sword, revealed an imperceptible bitter smile. Zhao Heng gently pushed the door open and entered. The small courtyard was filled with orchids. A woman was lazily leaning against the wooden railing under the eaves. She was graceful and refined. Zhao Heng said indifferently, when ordinary people see this woman in the courtyard, they will most likely mistake her for Pei Nan Wei. When Lu Su heard this, he was stunned for a moment. After confirming that the woman in the courtyard was not the Princess Jing and Pei Nan Wei, he was shocked by Crown Prince Zhao Sun's rebellious behavior. For someone as rich as His Royal Highness, it was normal for him to keep a mistress in a golden house. Even if he had a crown prince consort and kept a beautiful woman, no one would see it as rebellious. However, when this woman looked too much like a crown prince consort, it was somewhat shocking. Lu Su immediately understood why the king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, would say that it was a filthy thing. He looked down and no longer looked at the beautiful woman who was in a daze. The woman finally woke up. When she saw Zhao Heng, who looked 70 to 80% similar to Zhao Heng, she immediately knelt down. Her delicate body trembled and she couldn't say a word. Zhao Heng slowly walked to her side and reached out to hold a string of wind chimes under the eaves. He didn't say anything. The woman's face was covered in tears. After trembling for a long time, she raised her head and bit her lip until it bled. She said, I'm not afraid of death, but I beg the king of Jing'an not to punish His Royal Highness. Zhao Heng released the wind chimes and gently flicked them. They jingled. He didn't lower his head to look at the woman who was crawling on the floor. He sneered softly. Are you worthy of speaking to this king? The woman lowered her head and tears streamed down her face. The king of Jing'an listened to the sound of the wind chimes and slowly said, this king already knew from the first day you stepped into the courtyard. However, this scandal is nothing to this king. Su'er didn't cross the line. The woman was still trembling like a delicate orchid in the wind and rain. Zhao Heng continued, now for Su'er you have to die. Are you willing? The king of Jing'an and Lu Su walked out of the courtyard. Before Zhao Heng boarded the carriage, he paused and laughed softly. This king treats you like a scholar. Lu Su, who didn't speak, bowed deeply. The woman waited until the sound of the door closing. She wiped away her tears and went to the jewelry box to choose a pearl hairpin that Zhao Sun had given her. She came under the eaves and lay on the floor with him. She raised her head and looked at the wind chimes. Before the hairpin pierced her neck, she said softly, "Sun." When the king of Jing'an's crown prince, Zhao Sun, was in the capital, there was a piece of news that shook the world. The king of Jing'an, Zhao Hang, died of a chronic illness. Princess Jing'an, Pei Nanwei, committed suicide. The news spread to the capital. It was rumored that the crown prince, Zhao Sun, vomited blood and fainted. That day, the emperor's grace was vast and mighty. The emperor decreed that Zhao Sun was to be the king of Jing'an. Among the 7 vassal kings, he was the second to be granted a hereditary title. However, he was the first to become a vassal king, His Royal Highness. After Zhao Sun thanked the emperor in the palace, he quickly returned to Xiongfan City. After meeting Lu Su, he put on mourning clothes. In the dead of night, Zhao Sun, who was about to become the new vassal king of the dynasty, sat alone in the morning hall. He expressionlessly threw a handful of yellow paper into the brazier. After the mourning period was over, Zhao Jie, who was now Prince Jin gone, had his maidservants wait on him and put on his official robe. He dismissed the servants and stood in the room with his hands clutching his face. His expression was twisted and sinister, as if he was crying but not crying, as well as smiling but not smiling. He covered his face and lowered his head in tears. If there was someone watching, His Royal Highness would have an incomprehensible expression at this moment. It was a pity that the new noble Lu Su could only stand outside the door. Moreover, he was blind. Inside the room was the king of Jing'an, Zhao Sun. He covered his face and the corners of his mouth curled up. The capital. When a woman marries into the imperial family, no matter what her previous status was, she would have no choice. Chapter 462. When Yan Dongwu saw her younger brother Yan Qiji and Kong Wuqi visiting together, no matter how bad her mood was, it still improved. Moreover, she was married to the refined and introverted fourth prince. Although this husband of the emperor's son was a bit too playful and was obsessed with poetry, painting, and musical instruments, for a woman, it was already a heavenly wealth that she could not complain about. After the two became husband and wife, they treated each other with respect. Yan Dongwu didn't know what reason he had to be unhappy. Therefore, every time the stewards and maids of the Fu saw the imperial concubine, they always felt close and kind. They secretly praised her for being a daughter of a noble family. The bit of misgivings they had about their mistress being born in Bailiang was swept away. Yan Dongwu was knowledgeable, and it was clear that the fourth prince was very satisfied with this marriage. In the past, he did not socialize much with those disreputable friends of second and third rank officials. Today, together with Yan Dongwu, he received his brother-in-law Yan Qiji and Kong Wuqi, who was a little famous in the capital. The fourth prince had always been known for not putting on airs. Today, when he received two people of the same age, he gave them enough face. He personally served tea and water, and laughed and joked with his bookish brother-in-law. What was even more rare was that after the pleasantries, he took the initiative to find an excuse to leave, leaving the imperial concubine to chat privately with the two. In the past, Yan Dongwu loved the house and its crow, and hated the house and its crow. His impression of Kong Wuqi was not very good. After the family moved to the capital, he talked a few times with the sturdy but simple-minded Kong Wuqi and found it difficult to dislike him. Especially his younger brother, who was not on good terms with a group of young masters in the capital and often suffered losses. It was always Kong Wuqi, who had a good relationship with the second prince, who led people to get back at him. In addition, the Yan and Kong families were rare scholarly families in Bailiang. In the capital, which was very xenophobic, they inevitably helped each other. Yan Dongwu and his younger brother talked about some personal things, and some simple principles that one had to be clever when working in the capital's yamen. Kong Wuqi did not speak much, and only sat upright and still on the side, foolishly happy. From beginning to end, the three did not mention that name. Leaving the luxurious and grand mansion, the fourth prince still politely escorted him to the door. Yan Qiji and Kong Wuqi sat in the carriage together. Kong Wuqi asked innocently, "Yan eating chicken, your sister seems to hate His Royal Highness. Look, she doesn't even want to talk about it." Yan Qiji's face darkened as he said softly, "None of this matters now." Kong Wuqi said straightforwardly, "Hey, I used to think that Brother Feng could become your brother-in-law. At that time, I regretted that I didn't have an elder sister. I was so jealous of you. After a period of official cultivation, Yan Qiji, who had gradually lost his sharpness as a scholar, changed the topic and said with a bitter smile, I heard that Hanlin went to the Bailiang army. This guy really likes to do stupid things. Kong Wu Chi said unhappily, how is this a stupid thing? If a man doesn't go to the battlefield to kill the enemy, how can he still be considered a man? Yan Qiji glared at him. Kong Wu Chi curled his lips and muttered, You're not a man. Yan Qiji gave him a kick. Kong Wu Chi, who was not afraid of pain, was too lazy to hit him. He looked out the window and sighed, I really miss Brother Feng. No matter how much green ant wine I drink, it doesn't work. I just feel that it's boring. It's not the same taste as before. Yan Qiji said helplessly, You're a man now? Kong Wu Chi hugged Yan Qiji's neck and played around. In the mansion, everyone knew that the prince's wife had raised an expensive parrot that was clumsy in speech. It hung on the window of the study. Yan Donggu stood at the window and only dared to tell the parrot what was on his mind. The fourth prince saw this scene from a distance in the corridor. He leaned against the pillar with his hands behind his head and muttered to himself. The current dynasty followed the ancient rules of the previous dynasty. The high officials of the 3 provinces under the Minister of Governmental Affairs had to take turns on night duty in their respective headquarters. Other than the old Grand Preceptor of the Old West Chu, Sun Shiji, there was no exception. Today, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu received a report from a direct official in the main hall. He signed on it and took it away, returning it the next morning. The direct official was also used to this and did not flatter or flatter. Before this powerful blue-eyed man became the Grand Secretary, the central government officials took night duty as a hardship. Very few second-rank officials really followed this rule, especially those with noble status. They rarely showed up, and the official in charge of the report did not dare to say much. However, after Zhang Julu took power, he expelled a few men from the imperial court on his first night duty. No one dared to slack off anymore. Following the dynasty's peace in the 4 seas, there was a reputation for the forbidden night to settle the world. Tonight on duty, after Zhang Julu dealt with a few urgent affairs, he and an old friend of the same master, the left chancellor of the Imperial College, Huan Wen, were on duty. Zhang Julu did not drink. In the hearts of all the scholars, Huan Wen, who was as respected as the chancellor of the Shangyin Academy, was not happy without wine. Even the emperor made an exception and allowed Huan Wen to drink at night, but explicitly said that he was not allowed to get drunk. The left chancellor of the Imperial College was a thin and elegant old man. He joked, Old blue-eyed man, your complexion is not bad. What? The 2 sketches and 13 strategies King of Jing'an and His Royal Highness Zhao soon invited an expert to write on their behalf. Are you really treating them as a world-saving medicine? Grand Secretary Zhang narrowed his eyes and said, Poison is like honey, good medicine is bitter. These 13 strategies, once implemented, will at least make most of the imperial court's officials complain incessantly. Even the military will suffer great losses. Tell me, how can I not be happy? Huan Wen reached out his hand and pointed at his old friend who was only under him, cursing. The first sketches is a strategy in the temple. Even the Imperial College is insinuating that we are a bunch of useless scholars who don't know the hardships of the common people and only know how to study to death for scholarly achievements. I'm still fine since my skin is thick, not scared of being spat on by others, but the newly appointed Chancellor Song Yu will definitely be angered badly. Zhang Julu sneered and said, That literary giant with good handwriting, fortunately, only went to your Imperial College. Now that I've met him, he can still be considered a smiling face. If he went to the Secretariat or the Manxia province, I would still have a headache, unable to escape from becoming a political enemy of his. Huan Wen chuckled and said, This Song family father and son pair is a great literary giant who is going to dominate the literary world for 100 years. Old blue-eyed man, you should take it easy. If they hold a grudge against you, just wait for them to splash dirty water on you after you die. The blue-eyed purple-bearded Grand Secretary Zhang stooped down and reached out to warm himself by the fire, calmly saying, Pen knife, pen knife, pen knife, a pen is a knife. Killing people without spilling blood, in my opinion, he isn't inferior to great General Gu Zhentang. Huan Wen drank a small mouthful of wine, narrowing his eyes and lowering his voice, saying, The Green Party has already fallen apart, but the Gongnam-du Lu family brothers, one has become the Minister of Rights, the other has become the Assistant Minister of War. The atmosphere is gradually rising, aren't you nervous? Grand Secretary Zhang said indifferently, What's the point of being nervous about these things? I am only worried about things like drought, floods, locusts, and other things. Huanwen shook his head, not saying anything. He only feared natural disasters, not man-made disasters. With the officials in power, what more could he ask for? Insignia Mountain's Great Bull Mound, the two great guest elders Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu personally watched as that mountain lord woman placed a single hand on the head of a guest elder kneeling on the ground whose inner force wasn't ordinary, absorbing the aura of this man who was still a powerful martial artist a moment ago, not leaving a single drop behind. When she released her hand, that guest elder's body and blood essence didn't change, but his life force was already extinguished. The two guest elders who secretly captured this person to help the tyrant smiled at each other, their faces full of bitterness and horror. Even though they had already seen this scene many times, each time her absorption speed became faster and faster. The faster the mountain guest elder died, the more terrified they became. The woman who became Shen Yuan family's master asked with a smile, Uncle Hong, what number is this? Huang Fengfua steadied his mind, doing his best to remain calm as he said, 39th. It was precisely Shen Yuan Qingfeng who had brazenly ascended to this position during the Great Snow Plains upheaval. She bent down her slender waist, looking at that corpse that died with remaining grievances, her smile as innocent as a young girl's, saying with a smile, Two uncles, please be at ease. No matter how vicious Qingfeng's heart is, I still won't act against you too, my father's good friends. Huang Fengfua said softly, My only wish is for Miss to reach the pinnacle of martial arts as soon as possible. Shen Yuan Qingfeng retracted her gaze and stretched her body. Not only was her face glowing, but there were also wisps of purple qi lingering around her body. She said faintly, If my father were still alive, he would never say such words. Perhaps he would regard me, his own daughter, as a devil that could be killed, and would no longer be willing to release a jar of red osmanthus wine for me every year. Huang Fengfua didn't dare to say anything else. Hong Yu crossed his arms and began to close his eyes to rest. Shen Yuan Qingfeng frowned and asked, If I'm not mistaken, Yuan Tingshan must have somehow obtained Shen Yuan Pan's martial arts experience, and his blade technique realm skyrocketed. Otherwise, with his temperament, he would never compete with Gu Jiantang. On the other hand, our neighbor of Mount Hui, a young Taoist from the Taoist master residence with the surname Ning, on Mount Longhu was able to block the sword of the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. Compared to these two men, who's better? Also, during the Buddhist debate on the Golden Lotus Peak, a man with the surname Zhao brought a bald woman. Not only did she discuss Zen with Li Dongxin, she was also said to be the second person in the Vajra realm other than the white-robed monk. When can I be compared to her? Huang Fengfua didn't dare to speak nonsense, so he shook his head and said, It's hard to say. Shen Yuan Qingfeng suddenly smiled and said, Let's not bother about these troublesome matters. Oh right, there's an old saying that rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. It's not appropriate to always act against the guest elders on the mountain. I'll have to trouble the two uncles to go to the Jianghu and catch some martial artists. What do you think? Without waiting for Huang Fengfua to speak, Hong Piao opened his eyes and bowed, saying, I'm going down the mountain today. Shen Yuan Qingfeng waved his hand, and the barefoot woman walked to the left side of the spacious main hall by the cliff. The mountain wind whistled, and her sleeves fluttered. She slowly walked back to her boudoir and put on yellow flowers in front of the mirror. After drawing her eyebrows and putting on makeup, she held the bronze mirror with one hand and pointed at the person in the mirror with the other. She laughed inexplicably and said, What an ugly woman! The northern Liang mansion had silently lost a man and a woman, who seemed to be dispensable. One of them was Murong Tong Huang, who wore the skin of a transcendent god, and headed north. The other was Xu Xiao, who headed south. And Su Fengnian, who was alone, slowly headed north again after leaving Flying Fox City. Chapter 463. There were as many horse gangs at the border as locusts, but once they entered the hinterland of northern Mang, their numbers quickly decreased. Using Wooden Sword One Hua's words, His Highness the Crown Prince was very depressed at the moment. Only in the turmoil of war could people be forced into prostitution and become bandits. If the world was too peaceful, who would be willing to tie their heads to their belts and become bandits? This showed that northern Mang's territory was far from the so-called poverty of the people as described by scholars and celebrities. After seeing that Flying Fox City was as prosperous as the south, Su Fengnian became even more worried. Even if he was subtly influenced by the evil habits of the people left behind by the spring and autumn period, How many years would it take to soften a northern Mang that was as valiant as a strong man into a weak woman like the southern Tang? 30 years, 50 years, 100 years? How could Bailiang afford to wait? Su Fengnian rode his horse to the north, studying the swimming fish style on the 7th page of the knife manual. Because he could not understand the essence, he did not look at the 8th page. Other than the 12 sword cultivation methods, he occasionally rode his sword to kill snakes and scorpions. He repeatedly practiced the sword chi rolling dragon wall, which seemed to have the same effect as the rolling knife skill. Under the cool moonlight hundreds of miles away, he howled and cursed without any scruples. He cursed the old emperor, Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang, and countless emperors, generals and ministers, and also missed many people and many things. Unfortunately, there was no little girl Tao Manwu to help him relax his frowning brows. On this day, the scorching sun was still scorching hot. If not for the great yellow court, even breathing would be like drinking scalding hot tea. Walking in the desert, the water sack would dry up. This seemed to be a type of ascetic cultivation. Su Fengnian was reluctant to ride an inferior horse that was not suitable for the hot weather, so he followed old Huang's example and led the horse. His ears twitching, Su Fengnian walked to the top of a yellow sand slope and looked into the distance. He could vaguely see blurry figures under the scorching sun. 2 people were galloping over. Probably because they saw Su Fengnian, they suddenly changed their course and galloped over. Su Fengnian smiled. He finally bumped into horse thieves. This had nothing to do with his eyesight. It was just that these 2 young horse thieves were too obvious. Their upper bodies were bare, and they wore hemp breeches, revealing their lame dragon and tiger tattoos. They were only short of tattooing the word bandit on their faces. When they saw Su Fengnian, their eyes lit up. These 2 did not seem to be in a hurry to kill him and rob him. They whispered to each other. Su Fengnian's ears were sharp. After he heard what they said, he laughed involuntarily. They were not robbing him, but robbing him. It seemed that the leader of the horse thieves was a female hero who was somewhat in love. She let the horse thieves under her command snatch a handsome man with soft skin and tender flesh, and it would be best if he could read and write, to be her wife. The 2 horse thieves obviously did not think much of him. They muttered that he had thin arms and legs and would not be able to withstand a few blows from the chief. Although he was quite fair, if such a pretty boy stood together with the chief, wouldn't they become the black and white evils? If the chief took him out to drink with the other chiefs, it would be too embarrassing. The 2 horse thieves saw Su Fengnian was scared silly, but the horse thieves did not move. They became more and more speechless. Was this pretty boy a fool? In the past, when nomadic grassland herdsmen met by chance to raise livestock, even if they were not scared out of their wits, they were very vigilant when they saw them. However, this boy in front of them was foolishly holding the horse without moving. One of the horse thieves with a black tiger tattoo could not stand it anymore. He rode up the slope, pointed at the pretty boy with a horsewhip, and scolded in a rough voice. "Are you in a hurry to be reincarnated?" Su Fengnian turned a blind eye to the horsewhip pointing at him. He smiled and said, "I want to buy some water with you 2 brothers." The tiger-tattooed horse thief was stunned for a moment and lashed out with his horsewhip. Su Fengnian held the horsewhip and pulled down the horse thief who had hurt him. He kicked out with more dexterity than brute force. The horse thief's back hit the horse's back. Together with the horse, they flew out of the yellow sand slope. The tattooed horse thief was stunned. Su Fengnian took down the shriveled water sack and floated down to the bottom of the slope. He did not look at the struggling horse thief. The horse thief's horse was a good horse. He jumped up and shook the dust off his mane. Su Fengnian took the horse thief's water sack and put it into his own water sack. He then took a straw hat and did not argue with the 2 horse thieves. He whistled and slowly went away with the horse. When Su Fengnian was far away, the tiger-tattooed horse thief, who had been crying for his parents, quickly sat up and rubbed his chest. In fact, it was only a slight pain and nothing serious. He said to the tiger-tattooed horse thief with a lingering fear, "I met a tough nail." The other horse thief clicked his tongue and said, "The pretty boy is actually hiding his strength. The boss will definitely like him." The tiger-tattooed horse thief quickly got on his horse and said, "Let's go and talk to the boss." Su Fengnian led his horse and traveled alone in the wilderness. According to the Bailiang Palace's geography book, he would be able to see the grassland in a few days' time. He believed that there would be a chance to meet the herdsmen who lived by the water and grass. He was fine with it, But the poor horse beside him was a little tired because he often walked in the desert. He thought that when they reached the grassland, it would be best if his old friend could blend in with the wild horses. So he took off the saddle and reins and let it go. After resting for the night, Su Fengnian sat cross-legged, lit a bonfire, and looked at the low starry sky. The poor horse also bent its knees and rested, rubbing its neck against him. Su Fengnian patted the horse's neck, picked up a piece of soil and put it into his mouth to chew. The moisture was much better. It was time to get close to the grassland. Tasting soil was the entry skill of finding the dragon's pulse. Su Fengnian often went with his elder brother Yao Jian to study geography when he was young and learned many superficial tricks of looking for pulse. The world's ancestral dragons came out of Kunlun, and one of them entered Bei Mang. In the past, Bei Mang rarely talked about this. After a large number of adherents of the spring and autumn period, this talk became popular. The Empress of Bei Mang had become the destined son of heaven. Su Fengnian turned to the poor horse and smiled. "Old friend, do you believe it?" The poor horse snorted. As usual, it diligently cultivated the sword in turn, just like the farmers in Jiangnan who had to go out every night to grab water to raise rice. They could not afford to be lazy. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Su Fengnian quickened his breathing. According to the Taoist classics, the spring meal was the morning glow of the morning and the summer meal was the evening glow of the eastern sea. The evening glow of the morning glow was the beginning of the sun, and the morning glow of the eastern sea was the best. The evening glow of the morning glow was the beginning of the sun, and the morning glow of the eastern sea was the best. The evening glow of the northern sea was the purple qi in the middle of the night, and the extreme cold of the northern sea was the armor. The two were especially beneficial for cultivation. That Taoist orthodoxy lived up to expectations and became the state religion of Bei Mang. The current leader, Immortal Qilin, became a Taoist saint. Together with the abbot of the two Zen temples, they were known as the two saints of the north and south. In the early morning, Su Fengnian's breathing was red and yellow. It was probably because he had not reached the realm yet. He also could not say that it was very mysterious, but he felt more refreshed than usual. He slowly stood up and had some understanding. The so-called martial arts geniuses were divided into two types. One type had a body that was different from ordinary people, like Huang Manor, who was born as a Vajra. It could be said that they were blessed by the heavens. The other type had a relatively normal body, but they could be felt by the heavens. The bull rider was one of the best among them, and only then could they have the magnificent aura of stepping into the celestial phenomenon. The third type was slightly inferior to the first two, but it was not impossible for them to step into the land of immortals. For example, Li Chungang who entered the Great Tao with the sword, Wang Xianji who proved her Tao with strength, and Dong Tai who connected with the sword. In the path of martial arts, the higher one's realm was, the more one would go against the flow of the heavens. The heaven and earth were both a home and a cage. A martial artist had to form his own system, just like a naughty child who wanted to establish his own school. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the rising sun and muttered to himself, "Good and evil will be rewarded. If you don't believe, raise your head and look. Who will God spare?" Then he twisted his mouth and said, "It's said that good people don't live long, but evil people live for 1,000 years. When the ancients spoke reason, they liked to slap faces." Su Fengnian turned to look at a poor old monk wearing a kasaya and hemp shoes. His red phoenix eyes, which were sometimes charming and sometimes gloomy, stared straight at this southern Zen monk who had been sitting 10 zhang away last night. Buddhism was divided into Mahayana, and esotericism was divided into yellow and red. Everyone's attire was different. Because Su Fengnian's Wang Fei was a devout believer in Buddhism, he always had a good impression of monks. In Beiliang, many rogue Taoists changed professions to become monks for the sake of money. But in Bei Mang, he met an old monk who had traveled thousands of li to this uncivilized land to preach. Even though the monk looked kind, Su Fengnian did not dare to be careless. The old monk put his palms together and said, "Young master is a believer in Buddhism." Good. Su Fengnian suppressed the murderous instinct in his heart and silently returned the greeting. The old monk's kasaya had been washed many times. It could be seen that there were many fine stitches. But it was always clean and did not look sloppy. His beard and eyebrows were snow white. He held a bamboo staff in his hand and looked even more benevolent. In the Beiliang army, there was once a monk who wielded a staff of more than 70 jin. As one of the commanders of the infantry, he ate meat and drank wine. He killed people like flies. On the battlefield, he glared fiercely and was very bloodthirsty. He was highly regarded by Su Xiao. Unfortunately, because the Bailiang cavalry entered Jianghu, the monk retreated into the mountains. It was said that he passed away in a small mountain temple. At this time the old monk smiled and said, "This old monk came north from the two Zen temples to the two Zen temples. I wanted to discuss Zen with an old friend from the Taoist school. Although most likely it would be like a chicken talking to a duck, but at least it would be a load off my mind. By chance I saw young master swallowing the moon and eating the red clouds of the sun. I wanted to talk to young master endlessly, but I was afraid young master would misunderstand me as a bad person. So I did not dare to take the initiative to speak. But after thinking about it for a night, I felt that young master's heart is very deep. I don't know how to cultivate it. If I am careless and fall into it, it would be very inappropriate. Since young master is a believer in Buddhism, if you don't mind this old monk being noisy, I can talk to young master about Buddhism." Su Fengnian sat down again. He smiled and said, "So you are an eminent monk of the two Zen temples. I sincerely hope Senior will not be stingy with your advice." Chapter 464. The old monk did not approach and sat on the ground, facing Su Fengnian from a distance. After meeting, the old monk introduced himself to Meng Qi, showing his sincerity. The old monk placed his bamboo staff horizontally across his knees. Su Fengnian listened attentively. The old monk said slowly, "Young master used the Great Yellow Palace as a golden chamber, practiced the double rolling blade technique, nurtured the Wu family's flying sword outside, and nurtured the number one swordsman, Li Chuangong's green snake sword will inside. Your talent is great, your talent is high, and your perseverance is hard to come by." Su Fengnian, whose secrets had been seen through by the old monk, was shocked. His expression was normal as he smiled and said, "Senior, you don't have to restrain yourself first. Just say it." The old monk smiled and said, "In ancient times, when the wise men tried to control the flood, it was better to dredge it than to block it. Regardless of whether it is the sword or the saber, Buddhism's silent meditation, Taoism's golden chamber, or martial artists' closed scabbard meditation, they all go against the flow and accumulate the spirit. However, to me, going against the flow is not derogatory. Young master, please don't take it to heart. It's just that when you block the flow, it becomes a flood. When you dredge it up, you have to pay attention to it. Do you block it to the end, or do you occasionally make small mistakes?" Su Fengnian said sincerely, "I don't dare to play dumb with you. In my opinion, it's better to block it to the end. Because the bow has the principle of slackness, I understand that. However, if closed scabbard meditation is like a woman taking a stroll, walking and stopping, bashful and resting, I don't think it's a big deal." The old monk was not like those famous scholars who argued about the flow of the river. If there was a slight difference in opinion, they would be as aggressive as if they had killed their father. They would want to take all the principles of the world into their own hands. The old monk was not arrogant because he was from the two Zen temples. He still carefully pondered over Su Fengnian's words, which were suspiciously stubborn. He said calmly, "This old monk is not good at talking about big and small principles outside of Buddhism. I would like to shamelessly ask for some water from you first. Allow this old monk to slowly think it through before speaking to you." Su Fengnian smiled. He was in a good mood. He stood up, took out his water pouch, and leisurely tossed it over. After the old monk caught it, he took out a white bowl from his traveling bag. He poured half a bowl of water and drank a mouthful with relish. In the old monk's opinion, a bowl of very plain water was better than any delicacy. If it was his favorite porridge, it would be even better. Su Fengnian took a step back and stopped arguing. He asked, "What if I'm willing to drain the accumulated water?" The old monk raised his head and said, "It's enough to make love with a woman. Actually, your great yellow courtyard has already reached the realm of consummation. The reason why it's lacking is not because there are a few major acupoints that have yet to be opened, but because it's lacking yin and yang." The corner of Su Fengnian's mouth twitched a few times. The old monk laughed heartily and said, "Don't think that this old monk is a perverted monk. It's just that it's normal for men and women to make love. Although this old monk is an outsider, I don't see it as a scourge. Moreover, when I was young, I often couldn't sleep well at night. I was often beaten and scolded by my master." The old monk restrained his smile and said solemnly, "It's a good thing that you use the world's injustices to nourish your will. There's righteousness in the world. Although it doesn't repel murderous aura, it's mixed with evil aura and resentment. It's strong but not pure. You have to know that if you go astray, every step you take, every bit of strength you exert, it may seem like you're going far away from home, but it's actually going astray. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Moreover, in this old monk's humble opinion, when people say that they have a clear conscience, most of them are guilty. Even if they have a clear conscience, they are guilty of the truth. Allow this old monk to pour a bowl of water. The old monk poured a second bowl of water, leveled it, tilted it again, and shook it again until the water in the bowl calmed down. Young master, when we conduct ourselves in the world, we all use this bowl. The righteousness of the world is the water in the bowl. It's just that the depth is different. No matter how the bowl is tilted, this bowl of water is always as flat as a mirror. Su Fengnian frowned and said, "If that's the case, how can you say that a bowl of water is equal? Isn't this just making trouble for nothing?" The old monk drank a mouthful of water and shook his head with a smile. This old monk doesn't dare to make a judgment. Haha, this bowl of water was swindled from your hands. I'm ashamed. Ashamed. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His gaze became much gentler and he smiled. Senior is indeed an old immortal of the two Zen temples. With just a few words, you're able to talk about big principles on small matters. Compared to those Buddhist teachings that are scattered by heavenly maidens, it's much more pleasing to the ear. The old monk held the bowl of water in one hand and hurriedly shook it with the other. What old immortal? Young master, you flatter me. I am old, but I'm still far from being an immortal. Other than reading scriptures all year round in the temple, I'm not good at preaching scriptures. In fact, I only know how to do some farm work. Principles and whatnot are all figured out from farming. Su Fengnian asked curiously. The monks of the two Zen temples have been conferred the title of Imperial Preceptor countless times. Has Senior not been conferred the title of Imperial Preceptor by the Imperial Court? The old monk smiled lightly and drank a mouthful of water. He smiled and said, clothes can warm up 10%, rice can fill 7 or 8 stomachs, and tea can be drunk up to 5 or 6 flavors. That's enough. Su Fengnian smiled. Then you have. The old monk laughed. Reserved. Even if you're not an old immortal, you have to have the demeanor of an old immortal. I have a disciple who passes on my mantle. He also has a daughter. When he found out that I was going down the mountain, he advised me to have the demeanor of an immortal. Seeing that I wasn't willing to dress up properly, he sent me down the mountain and was lectured by her all the way. The corner of Su Fengnian's mouth twitched violently. With a gentle gaze he asked, "Is it a young lady with the surname Li? She has a little monk by her side who is her childhood sweetheart?" The old monk was like a Buddha who had opened his eyes. He immediately understood. So it's His Royal Highness. I've long heard that His Royal Highness sincerely worships Buddha. No wonder. I've been rude. Su Fengnian stood up and bowed respectfully. He said in a deep voice, "Su Fengnian greets the abbot." The old monk stood up and returned the greeting before sitting down again. He slowly drank his water and smiled. "Your Highness, you don't have to be so courteous." After Su Fengnian sat down, he asked, "Old abbot, are you going to Beimang to destroy Buddha?" The old monk nodded and sighed. "I'm not going to Beimang to be arrogant and try to influence the Beimang emperor who is bent on destroying Buddha. I just want to talk to the monks about the Diamond Sutra. I don't know the fate of heaven, but I'm doing my best. The Confucian saints have 300 poems. In a word, they are pure and innocent. The old lord rides a green ox and has 3,000 Taoist scriptures to seek peace. Buddha doesn't write words, but this makes us confused. The Beimang royal court wants to destroy Buddha. Without temples, without incense, without Buddha statues, without Buddhist scriptures, in my opinion, it's fine. But if there are hundreds of thousands of monks and everyone loses their Buddhist heart, this won't do." The old monk carefully put the water bowl back into his bag. After standing up, he smiled and returned the water bag to Su Fengnian. "Old monk thanks His Royal Highness for giving me 2 bowls of water. It's a good karma. If you're not in a hurry, Your Highness can head northwest for 40 miles. There's a canyon and you can stop there for a while. It might be another good karma." Su Fengnian took the water bag and smiled. "Old abbot, I have a favor to ask. Can you take this horse with you? I'm going north alone and I don't need to ride it anymore. I don't dare to give it to anyone as I'm afraid it'll be a disaster." If I leave it alone, I won't be at ease. The old monk, who was worthy of being called the Buddha head saint of Buddhism, smiled kindly. Of course, of course. It's no trouble to have a companion to talk to on the road. Su Fengnian put his palms together. I'll bid farewell to old abbot here. The old monk put his palms together and said with a lowered eyebrow, Old monk's parting words, Your Highness can teach Bodhisattva to grow black hair. Su Fengnian was stunned. He watched the old monk holding the bamboo staff lead the horse away until his figure disappeared from his sight. Exhaling a long breath, Su Fengnian followed the old immortal's instructions and hung his short knife, springtime thunder, and rushed northwest. Now he had nothing to worry about. Sure enough, he saw a deep canyon that stretched without an end. Su Fengnian climbed to the top and walked slowly along the cliff of the canyon. He didn't know where the so-called good karma was. After walking slowly for half an hour, he finished cultivating his sword. His feet trembled. It was as if there was thunder between heaven and earth. Su Fengnian looked back and saw thousands and tens of thousands of wild bulls pouring in from the other end of the canyon. They were like a flood pouring into a grain pot. His heart skipped a beat and he rushed forward for half an hour. His scalp exploded. Damn it, there were hundreds of herdsmen leading sheep and all their belongings in the canyon. Aren't they going to be crushed into meat paste by the herd of wild bulls? This is not a sunny road, but a road to the underworld. You guys have lived in the grassland desert for generations. Don't you know how dangerous this situation is? Su Fengnian looked down from above. He could tell that some of the herdsmen already knew what an earthquake that came out of nowhere meant. They were in a complete mess, the elders' faces ashen, many women and children even more so crying incessantly. Su Fengnian looked over again, his expression gloomy and cold. Behind the herdsmen were several dozen northern man cavalry with weapons in hand. They had already urged their horses to turn around and leave. As it turned out, this was a plan of driving a sheep into a tiger's den, yet not shedding a drop of blood. If the old monk had not bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind, the crown prince would have only watched coldly from the sidelines. After all, it was no different from committing suicide to stop tens of thousands of wild bulls alone. Su Fengnian gritted his teeth and floated down to the bottom of the canyon. Hundreds of herdsmen were dumbfounded. Some of the cold-hearted young herdsmen had already climbed up the cliff. However, the cliff was steep and they couldn't climb very high. Su Fengnian stepped out, drew a semicircle, and raised his hands. His feet sank 3 inches into the ground. He left the herdsman with an unfamiliar back. At the same time as the herd of wild bulls poured into the canyon, an old monk rode on a horse with one hand. His eyes were merciful. He put his palms together and said, This boy is very kind. Su Fengnian focused on condensing his qi, shaking Kunlun with a single move. Chapter 465. Su Fengnian abruptly slapped his forehead and stopped using the grand momentum-shaking Kunlun that he had stolen from Mount Hui's Great Snow Plateau. Then he swept backward, not caring whether the herdsmen understood the Gusai Zhou language or not, telling them to retreat first. Su Fengnian took the lead and carried a nomadic child under his armpit. Then, he picked up another youth and bent his knees slightly. Like an arrow, he shot off the cliff. After bouncing several times, he landed on the mountaintop. After landing on the mountaintop, he leaped down to the bottom of the canyon. Su Fengnian did not take a break. After more than 10 jumps, he finally brought more than 20 children to the mountaintop first. The sound of the cow hooves was like the explosion of spring thunder. The canyon's cliffs were shaken and dust filled the air. Around the corner, a herd of strong bison had already arrived like a tide. Su Fengnian did not pay attention to the young herdsmen who were pretending to stop. After a rise and a fall, he discovered a delicate figure bending down to support a child who had fallen down. Su Fengnian ran to her side and saw the side of her face from the corner of his eye. He was slightly startled, but he did not care about anything else. He casually picked up the 2 children and rushed to the mountaintop. After putting them down, he jumped down to the bottom of the canyon again. There were still more than 80 herdsmen who were desperately trying to escape in the canyon. He saw the young girl who could make His Royal Highness startled, pursed her lips and stood in place. Her face was filled with gratitude from the bottom of her heart. Her eyes were filled with the relief of life and death. Su Fengnian did not have the leisure to be unafraid of death like her. Facing the vast and mighty herd of bison, they descended to the bottom of the Kunlun Mountains together. The ground shook violently. The herdsmen were so scared that their legs went weak. The canyon's ground was originally uneven. The ground shook, making it harder to walk. A few elderly people staggered and fell to the ground. They struggled to get up and run again. Su Fengnian's momentum was majestic. It was like a sudden clap of thunder rising from the ground. Thunder against thunder. Qi flowed all over his body, leaking out like a flood. Su Fengnian exhaled again and suddenly opened his eyes. Both of his hands slid outwards in a gentle arc. The dust was unable to come within 1 zhang of his body. The girl behind him was dumbfounded. She only saw the young man with a saber in his long robe fluttering in the wind. When the frenzied bulls with red eyes were 10 steps away from him, it was as if they had hit an invisible iron wall. The front hooves of the first line of bulls that were running side by side with him were twisted and pressed backward. Then, countless wild bulls behind them piled on top of each other, until the bodies of the first line of bulls exploded. Blood splashed everywhere. But even so, the dense black mass of bulls was blocked and could not move forward at all. One by one, the wild bulls in the back, weighing 2,000 to 3,000 jin, hit the wall one after another. Their corpses and bones piled up. In an instant, a scarlet wall was erected. The thick and blurred blood was shocking. The strong wild bulls had 2 thick, long and sharp horns that curved into 2 shocking arcs. Their 4 legs were white below the knees, and their shoulders and backs were like lumps. Any one of them alone would make people tremble with fear. There were many scenes of lions and wolves being overturned by the horns of adult wild bulls on the grassland. Not to mention this flood of oxen that could topple mountains. In the narrow space of the canyon where there was no way to hide, it was like meeting enemies on a narrow road. There was no other way but to charge forward. The wild bulls were docile by nature. They just rushed into the canyon and ran wildly, gradually arousing their ferocious blood. Especially when they were blocked and stagnated by people, the saying of people going into a dead end really came true. Su Fengnian pressed down with his hands. More than 40 wild bull corpses suddenly fell down. His feet also slid back 2 steps on the ground. Without any obstruction, the herd of wild bulls stepped on the corpses and leaped over, continuing to run wildly. Su Fengnian's sleeves billowed. His left foot slid out a step. He spread out his arms and suddenly pushed forward. The wind and sand in front of him were blown up. Especially the 2 cliffs on both sides were pulled by the momentum. Many large flying stones were forcefully pulled out and shot toward the herd of bulls. Su Fengnian did not care about the blood that seeped out of the corner of his mouth. He knew that the flying stone was just a solution to the urgent situation, and could not escape from a drop in the bucket. The previous block and the next block only reduced and compressed the gap between the bulls and their tails. It seemed to be effective now, but when the momentum contained in the torrent completely rebounded and exploded, it would be the real pain. If he reached the Finger Mystery Realm, he could break the cliffs and have a chance to block the canyon. He reckoned that the body of an ordinary Vajra realm martial artist wouldn't be able to withstand the impact of the waves. Unfortunately, Su Fengnian, who was a step away from the Vajra realm, took a few steps back. He quickly took a breath midway and didn't even have time to spit out blood. His long robe moved without wind as he shook Kunlun again. If he could block 1 step, he would block 1 step. Again and again, the cycle of the big yellow court grew. Chapter 466. After going back and forth for more than a dozen times, he had already slid back 60 or 70 feet step by step. During this period of time, Su Fengnian was very anxious. His murderous intent was aroused, and he used the falling rocks to launch a wave of sword chi to roll the dragon wall, dismembering the bodies of more than a dozen wild bulls. The price was that he could no longer suppress his spitting blood. His heart was greatly shaken, and he no longer dared to let his emotions affect his decisions. He only felt extremely sullen, and his hostility skyrocketed. His eyes were crimson red, and the red date mark between his eyebrows slowly turned a light purple, and then a deep purple. He could no longer see and no longer hear. He could no longer weigh the pros and cons of life and death. Gradually, he reached a kind of indescribable state of bliss. There was a gap between life and death. The Confucians believed that there was no evil, that they had a clear conscience and were not afraid of life and death. Su Fengnian shook Kunlun and secretly learned from the Confucian scholar Shenyuan Jingqing in Great Snow Plains. He had an awe-inspiring righteousness. At first, he risked his life to save the herdsman. His heart was filled with an unknown good karma. But after a long time, he no longer had any worries. When he entered the world, he inadvertently gave birth to a desire for the world. He planted a golden lotus in the great yellow courtyard, waiting to bloom, and in a flash, he attained immortality. Su Fengnian opened the Ju K acupoints but did not realize it. His right hand was naturally behind his back. He closed his eyes and concentrated, his left palm facing up. He only remembered that when he first came to Mount Wudong, he heard that the hierarch Wang Zhonglo had once cut off the Kanglin River. Su Fengnian's left hand gently swiped and he blurted out, "Break the river." 10 feet in front of him, the ground cracked open and went straight to the cliff. A line of 6 or 7 buffaloes fell into the crack. After being filled by the buffaloes behind them who did not have time to jump, the buffaloes continued to run forward as if they were running on flat ground. Blood splattered everywhere. "You run, I break." Su Fengnian leisurely slid backward, breaking again and again. It was a tragic scene of the ebb and flow of the tide. Su Fengnian seemed to be free and unrestrained. He was indescribably leisurely and romantic. But he was already bleeding from his 7 orifices. No matter how mysterious and continuous the Great Yellow Court was, no matter how famous it was for its rich inner energy, it was not an inexhaustible bottomless abyss. Especially when it was very particular about turning back and forth. His Highness the Crown Prince forcefully raised his realm without any regard for his life and broke the river with one palm strike. He would eventually be exhausted. Su Fengnian swam like a fish among the green moss and green stones. He had no sword in his hand, but he had a clear idea of colliding with a flood of buffaloes. His intuition told him that he could comprehend the 6th page of the bladesmanship manual at the right time and place. Su Fengnian did not know how many times Su Fengnian had circulated his qi. Li Chungang once said that at the peak of the sword will, one could reach the 8 extremities and the pinnacle of swordsmanship. His qi could reach 800 miles in an instant. Su Fengnian did not dare to compare, but he was afraid that the boiling qi in his body could reach at least 100 miles in an instant. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. Without turning his head, he grabbed her soft shoulder and threw her back. He closed the scabbard and cultivated his blade. Originally, he had to pull his body like a full moon and only stop when he pulled it to the extreme. This kind of narrow path of martial arts was the most dangerous thing to do. If it happened, it would not be a simple drop of 1 or 2 realms. It would most likely destroy the foundation that he had painstakingly built for enlightening the acupores. The great yellow courtyard's lotus was not the wild grass on the plains. It would wither and bloom with each passing year. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven to bloom again after it withered. He did not know how far those herdsmen had run and whether they had left the canyon. Su Fengnian gritted his teeth. He thought to himself, "Damn it. I'll hold on a little longer. If I can't, I'll have to retreat. If I continue to hold on, I'll really die here. I'm afraid of death, but I'm not willing to give up." Su Fengnian allowed the bison to rush over. They were already very close. He still completed a big circulation and could clearly see the ferocious and terrifying eyes of the bison in the front row. The bison lowered their heads at the same time, wanting to stab this guy to death with their horns. Su Fengnian's clothes shrank and bulged again. The bulging was much stronger than before. He held a circle in front of his chest with both hands. Starting with a small circle, the circle gave birth to a circle, and the big circle had a magnificent atmosphere of encompassing heaven and earth. The dust in the canyon flew up like a round mirror. Su Fengnian moved back almost inch by inch. The herd of bison also moved forward inch by inch unbelievably. Su Fengnian had told himself that he would only hold on for a little longer. Unknowingly, he had held on for a long time. At the top of the mountain, an old monk in a plain kasaya stood with his feet off the ground. He held a bamboo Buddhist staff and walked like an immortal. Seeing this scene, he was slightly moved. He sighed softly and said, "When you forget yourself, you don't care about life and death. You're full of courage. When you wake up, you know that you shouldn't do something, but you still don't forget to do it. You know the nature of the root bone. A little selfishness is not enough to cover a good heart." The old monk rushed to the bottom of the canyon and swooped down like an eagle. He grabbed Su Fengnian with one hand and stepped on the void with the tip of his feet. He floated in the air and floated toward the young herdsman. He said softly, "Your Highness, please save people and allow me to stop the herd of bison." When Su Fengnian subconsciously hugged the young girl's waist, the old monk said softly, "Up." A man and a woman floated to the top of the mountain. The old monk's feet finally landed on the ground. He turned around and stabbed the Buddhist staff into the ground. If he wasn't wearing a kasaya, He would give people the impression that he was an old monk who looked like an old man in the countryside. His eyes were glaring as he faced the tide of buffaloes and let out a muffled low roar. His voice was like a thunderclap that spread miles away. Baimang's new Wushu review held this Buddhist saint in high esteem. It said, "The holy monk of the dragon tree of the two Zen temples is fearless. He has the Buddha's voice and the lion's roar." The herd of bison suddenly stopped rushing forward. There was silence. Blood flowed like a river in the canyon. The old monk lowered his head in shame and put his palms together. Su Fengnian was exhausted. He stumbled and sat on the ground. The young girl sat cross-legged behind him. Her eyes were full of tears. She gently supported His Royal Highness who was falling backward. Su Fengnian was not in the mood to care about whether the old monk had set a trap or not. He was not in the mood to care about the girl behind him. He just looked down at his blood-stained clothes and smiled bitterly. It's not good to keep vomiting blood like this. Then he fainted. The old monk pulled out his bamboo staff and came to the top of the mountain. He took Su Fengnian's pulse and felt relieved. Then, he took out a white bowl from the bag on his back. He slid his finger across his wrist to fill the bowl and handed it to the young girl. The old monk's blood was not the scarlet color of an ordinary person. It was the golden color recorded in the obscure Buddhist scriptures. He was a Buddha who had reached the Vajra realm. The young girl's thoughts were connected. She hugged Su Fengnian and fed him the bowl of golden blood that was worth more than a few coins. After the old monk got up, he floated to the bottom of the valley again. He recited the Vajra Sutra all the way. After leaving the canyon, he flew to the top of the mountain. He pulled down his inferior horse and led it forward. He said softly, "Congratulations to Your Highness for reaching the great Vajra realm." Chapter 467. Su Fengnian woke up in a daze, but he did not open his eyes immediately. He first checked the flow of qi inside his body, which was both good and bad. The newly opened Juk acupoint was a blessing, but the unfortunate thing was that he did not know why the qi inside his body was burning fiercely like firewood. Although it did not turn into ashes, there was an uncontrollable sense of crisis. This made His Royal Highness, who was used to controlling everything around him, feel uneasy and puzzled. He continued to check the breathing frequency around him before slowly opening his eyes. The first thing that came into his sight was a beautiful face. She was already stunning when he first saw her in the canyon. Her beauty could only be described as otherworldly. A pair of rare dark green eyes, like the green mountains and clear waters, should be worth 95 cents. Perhaps she was only slightly inferior to White Fox's face, Chen Yu and Jiang Ni. If she grew up and developed her charm, they might be on par with each other. Baimang was rough with wind and sand. Few women were fresh and beautiful, and their bodies were usually rougher and bigger than southern women. Could it be that Chao Guanzi monopolized the principle of 8 flowers of elegance, and swallowed the elegance of Baimang women? Su Fengnian suspected that he had been conferred the Golden Chamber of Commerce, and turned himself into a monk who only ate vegetables and did not eat meat. Unexpectedly, he did not want to look at this peerless beauty at all. He slowly stood up and took the initiative to separate himself from the soft and warm body. After nurturing the sword, it was as if his body was fitted with a precise hourglass. Even when he was meditating and breathing, he would automatically wake up every 2 hours and jump to the bottom of the valley. He silently controlled the sword and dripped a drop of blood on the sword, causing the flying sword to unexpectedly fall straight down. 3 days of effort had been wasted. Su Fengnian held back from cursing loudly. He frowned as he stared at the blood mark on his palm. The bright red blood was permeated with an inexplicable faint golden color. Even when he was at the consummate level of the Great Yellow Hole, he had never heard of such a strange sight. He no longer dared to nurture the sword carelessly. He withdrew the sword and his slender ame, which was as fine as a woman's black hair, swept back to the mountaintop. Most of the rescued herdsmen were young. They surrounded the young girl and looked at Su Fengnian with eyes full of reverence and worship. Su Fengnian ignored them. Looking at the bottom of the white bowl that was sparkling under the sunlight, he squatted down and stretched out his finger to touch it. He sniffed and guessed 70 to 80% of it. The reason why the Buddha was called the Golden Body Buddha was largely due to the so-called invincible body of the Vajra. It was rumored that the Vajra could make all the evils in the underworld retreat and all the ghosts in Fengdu crawl. It was only through Li Chuangong's explanation that Su Fengnian knew that the Vajra realm in the world could be considered as a fake realm. Only Li Dongxin of the two Zen temples and his younger brother Su Longxiang were the real Vajra. Back when Li Dongxin returned from his 10,000 li journey to the west, someone spread the shocking secret that a flesh-eating monk in white could obtain the golden body of immortality with a piece of meat. Evil figures swarmed over, but none of them succeeded. In the end, when Li Dongxin approached Chang'an, under the watchful eyes of everyone, he cut off a piece of meat and gave it to someone who was about to die of hunger and cold. A few years later, the old man died peacefully of old age, but he did not achieve immortality. Only then did his doubts dissipate. Su Fengnian sat cross-legged and stared blankly at the white bowl. The young girl and more than 20 children beside him did not dare to disturb him, so they accompanied him and stared blankly. Su Fengnian stood up and carried the two children down to the bottom of the valley. The herd of wild cows was intimidated by the Buddhist lion roar. They froze like a torrent and stopped moving. Finally, they all turned around and rushed out. Only then did the herdsmen feel at ease to pick the wild cow carcasses to store meat in autumn and winter. Su Fengnian sent the herdsmen down one after another. During this time, a few cheerful children felt as if they were riding on clouds and mist and laughed happily. In the end, only the slender and elegant young girl was left. North of Dragon Waste Prefecture was a very cold place. In autumn and winter, the rich people used the fur of marten, fox, rat, and raccoon as their fur coats. The poor people used the fur of cows, horses, pigs, and sheep as their clothes. In spring and summer, they used cloth and silk as their clothes. There was a difference in thickness between the rich and the poor. For example, the young girl in front of him had a narrow left sleeve and wore black leather boots. She could only be considered simple and neat. She could not compare to the silk and embroidered clothes of the maids and concubines of the noble families. However, she was a natural beauty. There was an exquisite chong flute tied around her waist. There was no one at the top of the mountain. Su Fengnian finally had the mood to look at her carefully. He was not in a hurry to send her into the valley. She blushed from being stared at. She lowered her eyebrows and 2 fingers quietly twisted the corner of her clothes. Su Fengnian smiled. He walked closer and pinched her chin. He tilted it up and forced her to look at him. Su Fengnian had seen with his own eyes the Mang cavalry hunting and chasing. He did not intend to get involved in this muddy pond. Beautiful women were a source of trouble. Su Fengnian did not have the ability to fool around in Bei Mang. The sword of emotion hurt people. Wasn't someone as open-minded as Li Chungang also suffering in the same way? Su Fengnian's selfishness in stopping the herd of oxen this time was obvious. He only wanted to leave a good impression on the Dragon Tree Monk, one of the 2 great saints of the world. If he expected His Royal Highness to help the Buddha to the west and save this group of herdsmen from the abyss of suffering, he really did not have this kind of compassion. Moreover, if they were involved with him, who could have a good ending? Su Fengnian picked her up and jumped down. He landed lightly on the ground. After letting her go, he did not say anything. He ignored the grateful herdsmen who were kneeling down and praying. His chi was continuous like the Kunlun dragon's vein. In a flash, he chased after the herd of oxen. After turning the corner, he slowed down and planned to turn back. He thought of a way to practice the swimming fish style on the 6th page of the knife manual. The Bei Mang cavalry had not seen the herd of oxen for a long time. Sensing that the situation was out of their expectations, they brandished their swords and rushed into the valley. Su Fengnian's hearing was amazing. He frowned slightly and stuck to the dark cliff like a gecko. He originally wanted to chase after the herd of oxen on the top of the mountain. He caught a glimpse of the last rider turning around the corner of the valley. Then he heard a sneer that all men understood. Su Fengnian walked along the ridge of the cliff and saw more than 30 riders circling around the girl at the bottom of the valley. Those who were skilled in horsemanship leaned their bodies and reached out to touch the girl's clothes. Su Fengnian cursed as he fell back into the valley. The arrogant cavalry did not notice that someone had appeared out of nowhere behind him. Su Fengnian was also too lazy to talk nonsense. He floated forward, one hand grabbing onto the tail of a warhorse. The warhorse that was galloping in circles felt a wave of pain and raised both of its hooves, neighing in pain. The fierce cavalry turned around in surprise, brimming with killing intent. A saber slashed towards this reckless fellow. Su Fengnian gripped his saber and dragged the cavalry off his horse. He kicked this sturdy warrior away, and his body smashed into the cliff, instantly turning into a pile of meat paste. Su Fengnian was shocked. When did he reach such a state? The rest of the cavalry were startled. A brave man urged his horse forward. Su Fengnian did not move at all. When the horse crashed into him, he pressed one hand on the horse's head. The horse's head exploded into the ground and died on the spot. The back half of the horse's body flipped over. Su Fengnian slapped it away with one hand. Together with the dead horse, both the man and the horse were thrown into the cliff. The only difference between their deaths and the former's was that the pile of meat paste was bigger. The more than 30 cavalrymen no longer cared about teasing the tender meat that was about to enter their mouths. They fled for their lives. Anyone could see that using numbers to crush the enemy was not going to work. Where there's life, there's hope. This principle was simple and plain no matter where it was. Since Su Fengnian had started a killing spree, he would not allow the fish that slipped through the net to pass on the information. He leaped up and strolled leisurely around the warhorse. He pushed out his palm, as if he was swatting a fly on the wall. Large scarlet blossoms appeared on the cliff wall of the canyon. Su Fengnian indeed could not do what Chen Jibao did, using a horse to drag Yi Baikui's wife and daughter to death in front of the western wall. But when it came to killing some barbarians in Beimang, he still had no scruples. If not for this, Su Fengnian admitted that he deserved to die in Beimang. Even if he had the hereditary title in his hands, what qualifications did he have to fight with Chen Jibao over Beiliang's military power? Snatching soldiers, snatching food, snatching people's prestige, and snatching the hearts of the army, all of these things had to be done with hands stained with blood, not with talking about benevolence, righteousness, and morality. Spring and autumn were not righteous wars. How many massacres were there? How many cities were massacred? How many people ate the food cooked by their fathers and mothers? Scholars, aristocrats, powerful officials, and military men, one after another, entered the scene. Even if they died, most of them could be considered to have left a mark or two in the history books. But too many people in the chaotic world who only wanted to be well-fed and well-clothed dogs died. Even their descendants, who were supposed to burn incense during the Qingming festival, died along with them. How could he command Beiliang's 300,000 cavalrymen with the benevolence of a woman? Once the empire's north gate was opened wide and Beimang drove straight down, the first to suffer would be Beiliang's millions of households. Those loyal officials of the Liang dynasty who had always been a burden to Beiliang were probably very happy to see this happen, even though they were grieving on the surface. Su Fengnian's face was gloomy. After taking care of more than 30 Beimang cavalrymen, he slowly walked toward the girl. She was the only girl among the herdsmen who saw him block the herd of bulls with her own eyes. At that time, she believed that he was the greatest hero in the world, like an immortal descending to earth. But when she saw him killing people, not just bulls, especially when she saw him slowly walking toward her, she subconsciously looked away and took 2 steps back. Su Fengnian sneered and rushed to the top of the mountain. He had done his duty and no longer cared about the herdsmen's lives. He chased after the powerful herd of bulls. The girl suddenly realized what she had done. She was so regretful that she wanted to die. She fell to the ground in a daze, her eyes empty. Su Fengnian came to the top of the mountain at the end of the valley and stopped to look into the distance. Saving one person, killing 10,000 people. Killing one person, saving 10,000 people. Which was more important? Even though Su Fengnian believed in Buddhism, he didn't understand and didn't want to know. He remembered that when he was young, his second sister Su Weisheng was confused about whether the white horse was a horse or not. The rough Su Xiao joked that if father sat there and said it was a horse, then it was a horse. Who dared to say it wasn't? It was this unreasonable Madame Wu who said to His Royal Highness that night that there was no one in the world who deserved to die, especially no commoners who deserved to die. As long as I, Su Xiao, am alive, Liang Mang will not lose a single commoner. Su Fengnian jumped down the cliff and ran wildly, following the hoofprints to catch up with the herd of bulls. First, he swam into the lake like a fish, shuttling back and forth freely. Then, he jumped onto the backs of bulls. He walked on the tide. Finally, he stood on the back of a bull, standing at the head of the tide. Chapter 468. Su Fengnian relied on his new Vajra body to squeeze into the herd, but he still suffered a lot. If he was not careful, he would be hit by the strong bison and kicked around like a ball. With Su Fengnian's stubborn character and his reluctance to jump out of the tide, he was washed to the ground several times and was trampled by dozens of bison in an instant. These white-stocked bison easily weighed 2,000 to 3,000 pounds and could not bear it. Only then did he flip over the bison's hooves and jump onto the back of the bison. Fortunately, he had the protection of the mirage evolved from the Big Yellow Court, or else he would have been in rags. He either lay down or sat on the back of the bison, rested or nurtured his sword, and then looked for his own suffering. He jumped into the narrow gaps of the herd and continued to slide like a fish. At first, he collided with the bison several times and was battered and exhausted. He was so angry that he could not wait to use the sword chi rolling dragon wall to smash hundreds of bison. However, he suppressed the irritation in his heart and combined with the big yellow court heart sutra. He finally figured out a way to move with the flow. When the herd stopped to rest, he would stay away from the bison, sit alone and concentrate on flying on his sword. Once there was a wolf pack that targeted the calf. Su Fengnian did not kill it. Instead, he stomped on the ground and frightened the wild wolves away. After a few days of ups and downs, Su Fengnian was full of the smell of bull, as if he had become a member of the herd and was accepted by many bison. When Su Fengnian passed through the entire herd from the end of the herd and finally took the lead to run, the herd actually followed him for more than 10 miles. Seeing a large patch of water grass, Su Fengnian lay down on the grass by the lake, panting and feeling satisfied. After obtaining the essence of the swimming fish style on the 6th page of the bladesmanship manual, he realized how short-sighted he was at first. If he merged it with the rolling knife technique, he would be like a fish in water, complementing each other. He turned to look at the spring thunder hanging on his waist and said self-mockingly, "Spring Thunder and Xiao Dong are a pair of sisters. After we separated, you were unlucky to follow an idiot like me. Xiao Dong stayed by White Fox's side, so I can't embarrass you too much." Su Fengnian took off his black gown and white coat and put them into the lake to wash, revealing the soft silk precious armor that Jianghu people dreamed of. The soft armor was once pierced by Miss He's hand knife at the chest position. After returning to Bailiang, the Pivotal Pavilion's craftsman hurriedly repaired it. This secret organization must be busy now with the red armor that had lost its talisman generals. The Bailiang army's combat power was amazing, and the Pivotal Pavilion, led by the giant of the School of Mo, had made great contributions. The soft armor was woven with 12 sword pouches, which stored the flying swords separately. Before entering Beimang, Su Fengnian had reached his limit by riding the flying swords 4 or 5 times. After the battle with the devil Xia Ling, he stayed in the city to watch the fierce woman lotus slowly bloom. He occasionally had an epiphany and opened another acupoint. In the canyon, he fought with the wild bulls and broke through the juk, opening 3 new acupoints. Su Fengnian spread out his clothes and sat cross-legged on the grass. He rode the 9 flying swords in a dazzling manner. This was the reason why it was said that good techniques were beneficial to martial arts. Each flying sword had its own emphasis on the circulation of qi, thickness, and meridians. It required the sword owner to divide his mind into 9 parts. Of course, it was not to say that Su Fengnian was only 3 sword realms away from the previous sword owner, Dong Tai. Although there was only 1 word difference between riding a sword and controlling a sword, it was still an insurmountable heavenly gate. The 9 flying swords in the air were respectively the green plum blossom with a smooth sword arc, the bamboo horse with a segmented bamboo body, the morning dew with a dazzling radiance every time the sun shone on it, the peach blossom sword with a pink body, the amaze sword with a slender black hair without a handle, the smallest but at the same time incomparably sharp swan and eye, the vermilion bird with a scarlet radiance lingering around it, and the last one was the huang tong with a wide and thick body. Each of the 9 flying swords had its own merits. His childhood sweetheart Chao Lu Chunshue was like the girl next door, nurturing the sword smoothly. Peach Blossom Ame, Vermilion Bird Huang Tong was like a lady from a respectable family, progressing a little slower. The other 3 were like the beauties that could topple a city, unmoved by force or persuasion. Su Fengnian also served them diligently every day, but the formation of the embryo was extremely slow. However, that day when the golden blood of the Buddha was mixed in, Ame fell, and the rest of the swords were more or less the same. Only the first sword of golden thread almost instantly formed a sword embryo, which was a great surprise. Regarding the previous swords that were wasted for 3 days, Su Fengnian did not feel so distressed anymore. After nurturing the golden thread, the golden luster in the blood had completely faded away, which made Su Fengnian feel relieved. He could not abandon the other 11 swords just to nurture the first sword of golden thread. This was a huge loss, and there was no way he could be so wasteful. Su Fengnian controlled the flying swords to cut the water weeds. He wondered what Dong Tai would think if he saw this scene. After he was exhausted, Su Fengnian put the 9 swords back into the sword pouch. He grinned and leaned back, his hands folded behind his head, and closed his eyes, half asleep. Yao Jian had been influenced by the geomancy master Yao Jian. Other than knowing some superficial kung fu of tasting earth and water, he also knew a thing or two about dragon veins. Yao Jian once said that the dragons of the world came out of Kunlun. Of the 3 great dry dragons, one landed in Taiyan, one came out of Donghai, and one entered Beimang. There was a saying in Qingshui geography that the mountains were old and lifeless, while the young mountains had luck. Therefore, one searched the mountains but not the old, one searched the young mountains. The closer one was to Kunlun. As time passed, the more difficult it would be for a dynasty to be born in the West. Not to mention the imperial court, just in terms of feng shui, when Su Xiao had stationed troops in Beiliang to confront Beimang, he sent the 2 great vassal kings of the imperial family, Yan, Qi, and Guangling, to the southeast to be in charge of suppressing the qi of the dragon. The Son of Heaven, Zhao family, was not without the hidden selfishness of having outsiders guard the door and courtyard while their own family members looked after the treasures. Among them, because the Guangling prince and the current emperor shared the same father and mother, they were able to be stationed in the Donghai region. It could be said that they had put a lot of thought into this. However, when talking about the fate of a dynasty and one's own destiny, there were always too many contradictions. Li Yishan was very resistant to this, and at the same time, Yao Jian was also implicated a few times. Su Fengnian suddenly stood up and put on his clothes. Then, he saw a middle-aged Taoist who did not look like a Taoist priest from the Central Plains. When he saw him, he only glanced at the spring thunder and lost interest. This Taoist priest had slanted eyebrows and a pair of almond-shaped eyes. He wore a short brown robe with a colorful silk belt tied around his waist. On his back, he carried an ancient bronze sword with pine patterns. His appearance was elegant, and he had the demeanor of an immortal. He asked in a southern Beimang accent, "Have you seen an old monk with a bamboo staff?" Su Fengnian calmly shook his head and said, "Master Taoist, I have not seen him." Chapter 469. The Taoist narrowed his eyes and continued to ask, "You seem to have mastered the superior Taoist breathing technique. May I ask which Taoist Zhenren taught you?" Su Fengnian, who had already concealed his qi, pretended to be angry and said, "No comment." The middle-aged Taoist smiled, but his smile was cold. "Oh? Then you must be a spy from Beiliang." In northern Mang, Taoism was the state religion. Taoist Master Qilin of the Tao Dao sect was a state teacher whose status was so high that it could reach the 9 heavens. The great Taoist master had 6 outstanding disciples, and he was also regarded by northern Mang as an immortal who had attained the Tao and could move the clouds and summon the rain. Before the empress ascended the throne in Beimang, Taoism was not prominent and Buddhism was prosperous. Since Taoist Qilin was given the title of national teacher, he was called the Emperor's Yellow Paper Imperial Edict. 316 people bowed to him together. Because of this, Buddhism gradually became silent. Taoist temples of all sizes in Beimang's imperial city sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain. Hundreds of Taoists from Tao Te sect rose to the heavens. Most of them had a meteoric rise and were treated as distinguished guests by high-ranking officials and nobles. Su Fengnian was surprised. "Are you an immortal from Tao Te sect? I often heard about the miracles of Tao Te sect's Taoist Qilin in Gusai state. Are they all fake?" The Taoist with a sword on his back sneered. "Buddhism emphasizes the equality of all living things. When have they ever treated everyone equally? I know that I have no hope of attaining Tao. What I do in the dynasty is to kill evil with one sword." Su Fengnian seemed to be forced by the situation and had no choice but to lower his head. He said helplessly, "I did see an old monk heading north. He even asked me for half a bag of water to drink." The old monk said that he came from 2 Zen temples and was going to Qilin Temple to discuss Buddhism with the national teacher. The almond-eyed Taoist heard every word and snorted coldly before drifting away. Su Fengnian waited until the figure of the Taoist disappeared and confirmed that there was no doubt that he did not turn back to hide. Only then did he let the qi in his body rise spontaneously, contracting and expanding. The surface of the small lake beside him suddenly broke and ripples suddenly appeared. Su Fengnian had been like a fish swimming in a herd of cows for the past few days. He knew that he had reached the initial stage of Vajra realm and was not surprised. Below the second level, one's realm was judged by the amount of armor breaking. It was already a great fortune for martial artists in the world to reach the second level. It was enough to be called an outstanding martial artist. They were scattered all over the world and were regarded as unattainable masters by ordinary people. However, only after entering the first level, Did they know that the past was only a small part of the picture? After the picture of 1,000 miles was spread out, it was a truly beautiful scene. Just like how Su Fengnian was riding a flying sword now, he wasn't only able to see where the flying sword ended up, he was also able to vaguely see the trajectory of the flying sword. Su Fengnian guessed that once he reached the profound finger realm, he would be able to predict the trajectory of the flying sword in the next moment. As for the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth of the first-grade celestial phenomenon realm, Su Fengnian had no way to predict the profoundness of it. Su Fengnian looked at the lake that was gradually calming down and muttered to himself, "Food should be eaten one bite at a time. A woman's clothes should be taken off one piece at a time." What Wen Hua said is always very reasonable. Since he had comprehended the swimming fish style, Su Fengnian did not disturb the herd of cows. He rested for a day and a night by the lake. While the iron was hot, he struck the iron while it was hot to control the golden thread alone. The great Tao was ethereal and difficult to find. Even the sages had to say that it was impossible to float on the sea on a boat. Swordsmanship was the same. The Wu family's sword tomb was unconventional and sought the Tao with skills. They did not pursue the abstruse artistic conception of breathing qi into swords. Instead, they diligently climbed to the peak of swordsmanship and swordsmanship. Raising swords was one of the unique side doors. Su Fengnian had profited from a disaster outside the martial emperor city and obtained the 12 flying swords. He raised 12 swords at the same time like a madman and never got tired of it. It could not be regarded as a reckless waste of God's gifts and worthy of the new sword god uncle's kindness of giving him the swords. As for when he could ride the sword and take the head, Su Fengnian had nothing to do and was secretly happy for a while. He did not dare to have extravagant hopes of accomplishing it in one go. The old abbot, the holy monk Long Shu, praised him for his extraordinary talent. Su Fengnian did not belittle himself nor did he dare to be arrogant. He just laughed it off because there was no reason for His Royal Highness to be arrogant and conceited in front of Li Chun Gang and Bai Hu-er's beautiful faces. Su Fengnian walked slowly along the lake. The qi in his body was complicated at first, circulating according to the sword qi rolling on the dragon wall. When he first entered Vajra, he returned to simplicity and began to circulate the qi in his body like a swimming fish. He did not know how long he had walked, but suddenly he heard the melodious sound of a chong flute. Looking up, he saw a group of herdsmen building black and white tents and large and small yurts in the distance. Every time the snow and ice melted, the herdsmen of the grassland would drive their carts and ox carts to find new pastures for their livestock. It was currently April and August, and the weather was warm and the water was lush. It was the golden season for herding. However, the life of a herdsman without a fixed residence was not as free as one might imagine. When the tribes of the grassland of Beimang migrated, they had to follow the rules set by the Shirti and set up camp in the grassland. Although the grassland was large, the grazing land was almost completely encircled by the Shirti. These Shirti were the noblest and most powerful, occupying vast areas. Only a few herdsmen who had saved the lives of the descendants of the Beimang kings had the right to freely set up camp. Generally speaking, even if the grass was dry, the Shirti would not allow the herdsmen of the neighboring tribes to enter their territory to seek refuge and protect their livestock. Therefore, the grassland was perennially embroiled in internal strife. Even though the grassland was also part of the royal family, there would still be a lot of bloodshed. It was only after the Empress of Beimang ascended the throne and worked hard to suppress the Shirti of Yelu and Murong that the situation improved slightly. Su Fengnian followed the melodious sound of the chong flute and saw a graceful figure playing the flute in front of the lake. She puffed up her cheeks and took a breath before playing the flute solo. It was melancholy. Su Fengnian was proficient in music, but he did not know much about the chong flute. There were a few high-quality chong flutes made from Shishu Min bamboo in the manor. In Wutong Garden, only the head maidservant, Sweet Potato, was proficient in this. Su Fengnian stopped and listened for a long time. He felt a little melancholy. These past few nights when it was quiet, he did miss the scene of him sleeping peacefully on Sweet Potato's thigh. The elasticity of those beautiful legs. Teske. Su Fengnian hurriedly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and silently recited the mantra to clear his mind. He did not know that it would have been better if he had not recited it. If he deliberately wanted to have a pure and innocent state of mind, the qi in his body would overturn rivers and seas. Once he stepped into Vajra, the title of Golden Chamber of the Great Yellow Court would be dispensable. For a moment, His Royal Highness felt like a lecher returning to his old ways. Su Fengnian felt a headache coming on. There were two paths in front of him. He could either be a beast that dragged a woman into the fields, or he could be a fool who scrupulously followed etiquette and was worse than a beast. His Royal Highness and his crotch were both very melancholy. The next chapter is before 12 o'clock. If there is a third chapter, it will be very late in the morning. Chapter 470. With the release of Baimang's new martial arts evaluation, it was well received by the two dynasties. Immediately, there were many works that followed the trend. The top 10 literary heroes in the world, the top 10 swordsman heroines, were too many to count. This was not considered too strange. There were also many restaurants that put up one of the top 10 famous dishes in the world, and many cloth shops that put up one of the top 10 silk fabrics. People didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Baimang had an evaluation of the top 10 famous courtesans of the current dynasty. Compared to the elegant and reserved women in the south, they were much more explicit and erotic. The most famous courtesan of Fong Fong Lu in Flying Fox City was famous for her small mouth. It was said that her nimble little tongue could make cherries knot. Her ultimate skill was the beauty playing the jade flute. In addition, there were also some evaluations of the Enyang pot, which made the scholars of the Central Plains feel even more ashamed. As for what they were thinking and whether they coveted the various wonderful uses described in the text, it was unknown. At this time, the beauty's thin lips were sucking on the flute. Su Fengnian could not help but let his imagination run wild. Previously, he was full of hostility and had a bit of a grudge against this young herdsman girl. Now that he had calmed down, she was relatively pleasing to the eye. Beautiful women were really a gift from heaven. Not only could they be a feast for the eyes, but they were also pleasing to the eye. However, Su Fengnian was picky and harsh. He knew that this kind of poor girl, even if her face and figure were worth 95 won, would not be able to withstand deductions. For example, if her hands were rough due to years of hard work, 1 won would be deducted. If she was herding sheep and riding horses, her buttocks were destined to be soft, 1 won would be deducted. If she was not literate and had shallow knowledge, 2 or 3 won would be deducted. Su Fengnian's disdain for those heroines in the past was not without basis. Although their sleeves were fluttering in the wind, they were like fairies descending to the world. Unless they had reached the realm of perfection and were able to grow flesh and bones, their hands would be calloused. If they were to wield weapons, who could guarantee that they would not have scars while practicing martial arts? Later, Li Chungang, who was at the time of the martial arts competition, commented that the girl's feet were really big. It was said that the girl was so angry that she cried. After she lost to Li Chungang in a sword competition, she was unwilling to set foot in the Central Plains again. It was conceivable that it was not easy to become a famous heroine, especially one who was gifted and had a full chest. If they fought with others, they would tremble and the onlookers would feast their eyes. Of course, they would think that it was beautiful, but the heroine herself would probably be secretly distressed. When the young herdsman saw the man who had brushed past her in the canyon for the first time, she was first surprised, then afraid, and finally guilty and happy. Her 5 fingers clenched the exquisite flute and she did not dare to make a sound. At first, she was afraid that this young hero, who had done a great favor for the whole tribe, would leave without saying goodbye. Seeing him standing not far away with a smile, she was slightly relieved. It was just that her palms were sweating and covered with her beloved flute. She bit her lips and did not dare to make a sound to disturb her benefactor's contemplation. She was not a tribesman and was thrown outside the yurt when she was an infant. She was only left with a token, the Chong flute, which was engraved with the 4 words, Yelu Murong. The girl grew up and became more and more beautiful. However, on the grassland, a woman's beauty could not escape. She was just a commodity in Shirty's bag and could be sold or offered as tribute. Her benefactor, Shirty, was only a small aristocrat on the grassland. He had enough to preserve his territory but not enough to expand. When he learned that a beautiful woman who was said to be unparalleled in the world had appeared in his tribe, he hurriedly prepared to gift her to a big Shirty in exchange for a new pastoral land. The small and weak tribe could not bear the humiliation and migrated. Little Shirty, who controlled the life and death of the tribe, was furious and sent cavalry to chase them. This group of herdsmen had to cross the territory and camp. Little Shirty had no choice but to pay the neighboring tribe gold and silver as a toll fee, but he did not dare to tell the truth. He did not expect that a powerful old Shirty would learn the inside story. The old Shirty, who was half 100 years old, coveted the girl and simply killed more than 10 cavalrymen to chase after this fat meat. The last Shirty was a descendant of the Yelu branch. He was famous for his cruelty in commanding troops and governing people. He did not lust for beauty at all. He directly ordered the killing of this group of illegal herdsmen. Only then did he have the cold-blooded skill of driving sheep into the tiger's mouth. Coincidentally, the Buddhist saint and the Prince of Baelyang who went to the north to meet inadvertently stirred up the situation. The muddy water became even more muddy, which allowed the herdsmen to linger at death's door and set up camp in this fertile land. A few days ago in the valley, the girl took the initiative to find the tribal leader and said that if the local grassland heroes made things difficult for her again, she was willing to go to the Shirties' camp. The tribal leader was old and had been running all the way. Although he felt sorry for the girl who was like his own granddaughter, he did not refuse. After all, the old man had 100 lives on his shoulders. If he persisted, not only would he be hunted down as a plaything by the big and small Shirtie, the young herdsmen in the tribe would almost rebel. The herdsmen were poor and could not do the pretentious good deed of leaving food for the rats. She had the kind temperament of sweeping the ground for fear of hurting ants as usual. Although she was lonely and had no one to rely on, she could make the tribe protect her at all costs. Half of it was because of her beauty, and the other half was because they pitied her hard life. It was not a good thing for a woman to be beautiful on the grassland. Su Fengnian was not afraid to judge others with the most malicious intentions. Even if you were the abbot of the 2 Zen temples, Su Fengnian had been repeatedly weighing and guessing these days. Where was this good karma? Especially in the valley, the lion's roar of Buddhism came late and hundreds of bison died in his hands. Wasn't it indirectly killed by the old monk who claimed to have made a big mistake? Wasn't it just like the apricot-eyed Baimang Taoist who said that monks could not achieve equality for all living things? How should this account be settled? To put it bluntly, it was nothing more than haggling over every ounce with the heavens. Everything had its gains and losses. The old monk was already in the realm of Buddha, yet Su Fengnian was using a stupid method to think about the bigger picture. One day, he would inherit the title of Prince of Northern Liang. Did this have anything to do with Northern Mang's destruction of Buddhism and the end of the world? The 2 Zen temples' original intention was to let the little monks of the north and south go to Jinding to debate with Taoism. However, it was dispelled because of the little girl's dream. According to the information gathered by the spies of Baelyang, in that dream, countless armored horses came to Baelyang. Su Fengnian was not only curious about the little monk who erected a monument and became a Buddha, he was more concerned about where the armored horses came from. The aftertaste of this dream was too long. Even Li Yishan, who never believed in ghosts and gods, racked his brains and buried himself in the ancient books of Buddhism and Taoism. In the end, he used the Book of Changes to interpret the dream, but the result was still very little. Chapter 471. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. After the white-clothed monk won the debate at Mount Longhu, he and Zhao Danping were summoned to Tai and City by decree. Then the old abbot personally went down the mountain to Baimang to discuss Buddhism with the Qilin Zhenren of the Tao Te Dao sect. Su Fengnian's mind wandered thousands of miles after the initial heat. When he came back to his senses, his mind was as calm as still water. This made His Royal Highness worry about whether or not there was a big problem between his legs. He sighed inwardly and approached the girl who was at least 85-1. He took the Chong flute from her hand. Seeing the 4 characters of Baimang, he frowned and asked, "Do you understand the language of the southern dynasties?" The girl's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "I understand, but I can't speak it well." The language of Baimang was originally complicated and varied. After the empress took over the dynasty, it gradually changed. However, the northern and southern dynasties were still distinct. Every time the empress went on a hunting tour, she would discuss matters with her close officials. Occasionally they would talk about things. Of course, the powerful officials of the northern royal court would mock and ridicule the officials of the southern dynasties. The people of the northern dynasties who were born in the imperial tent were inevitably filled with a sense of superiority. After the end of the Spring and Autumn War, the Central Plains was stabilized. The empress took over Baimang as a young monarch and usurped the throne. Then, she took the opportunity to settle the remnants of the Spring and Autumn War. This caused Baimang to be in turmoil. The Liang dynasty and the Liang dynasty fought 6 times. The Liang dynasty won 2 times in name, but the true meaning of victory was only 1 time. It was when the empress took the opportunity to unify the Spring and Autumn War and took the opportunity to take the initiative to attack Baimang's unstable foundation. They won on 3 fronts and fought all the way to the capital of the southern dynasties. Unfortunately, they couldn't finish the war in one battle and continued their northern expedition, leaving Bei Mang with a chance to breathe. People only said that Su Xiao, the king of Bailiang, was greedy for power and didn't want to destroy Bei Mang. As a result, he had no soldiers to lead, so he withdrew his troops. In reality, both sides were preparing to sign an alliance. Only Su Xiao didn't hesitate to use his head as a guarantee and privately went to the emperor. He said that as long as the emperor gave him a secret edict, he could only lead the Bailiang army and enter the north alone. Even if he had to sacrifice 200,000 soldiers, he would make Bei Mang lose its title. At the time, the old Grand Secretary stood by the monarch's side and only laughed coldly. The next day, Su Xiao was the first to withdraw his troops back to Bailiang to express the Liang dynasty's sincerity. This could be considered Su Xiao's second time being a scapegoat after the Spring and Autumn War and his rise to the Jianghu. Many old soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles silently withdrew from the Bailiang army at this time. In the 5 battles between the two countries, the Liang dynasty lost more than they won. The 4th time was the most crushing defeat, almost exhausting all of the elite border troops the previous emperor had accumulated. The eastern front north of Great Peace City was cleared of the wilderness, and it was even more forbidden to raise troops and attack without permission. It was only now that General Gu Jiantang had resigned from his post as the Minister of War and was personally overseeing the 2 Liao provinces, in addition to the Grand Secretary Zhang Julu's support, which was said by the scholars to have spent half of the dynasty's wealth, that the declining situation took a slight turn for the better. Su Fengnian directly asked, "Who are your parents?" She shook her head and said, "I am an orphan, adopted by the clan when I was young." Su Fengnian was most familiar with the dirty tricks of the imperial family. He asked with a smile, "Have you never thought that you might be a golden branch or jade leaf with the surname Yelu or Murong?" The young girl's eyes widened and her mouth dropped open. Clearly, she had never thought about this matter. Su Fengnian inadvertently saw the pink tongue behind her white teeth and felt hot again. However, he didn't feel the least bit ashamed of his inferiority in front of a beauty. He only lowered his eyebrows slightly and glanced down at his waist, silently praising, "Good brother, you are very capable." After working hard to cultivate the Great Yellow Courtyard, there shouldn't be any irreversible side effects. Otherwise, His Royal Highness would really use a piece of tofu to knock himself to death. Without any worries, Su Fengnian was in a good mood and threw some of the troublesome problems to the back of his mind. He remembered that in the past, he had spent a lot of money to buy countless poems. When they reached his second sister, only one line, "Tomorrow worries will come, tomorrow worries," entered her eyes and made His Royal Highness so happy that he had the servant send another 700 taels of silver to that poor scholar, 100 taels per word. Later, he heard that this scholar had passed the imperial examination and had some fame in the capital. He was one of the few honest people who didn't want to wallow in the mire and curse His Royal Highness with the scholars. It was probably because of this that he had waited on the cold bench for several years before he was replaced by a county clerk in a barren mountain and turbulent river. Su Fengnian sat by the lake and beckoned her to sit down. Smelling the unique fragrance of a woman, His Royal Highness, who hadn't even seen a female mosquito after leaving Flying Fox City, felt as if a lifetime had passed. The wild bulls were vast and mighty. Su Fengnian was wholeheartedly studying the swimming fish style in the knife manual. How could he care about distinguishing between male and female? Besides, even if he could distinguish between the two, what else could he do? Su Fengnian wasn't even afraid of the devil Xialing, but this thought scared him so much that he trembled. He then held his belly and laughed. It could be said that he found joy in the bitter struggle of Bei Mang alone. After laughing, he saw that the young girl who was sitting upright and still was confused. No matter how thick-skinned Su Fengnian was, he wouldn't be so brazen as to mention this. He lowered his head and stroked the Chong flute. The two dark purple bamboo pipes were side by side with gold and silver threads intertwined. The holes of the pipes were smooth and round. Even after many years of playing and stroking, there wasn't the slightest bit of wear and tear. It could be seen that it was a precious Chong flute of top quality. Su Fengnian could be considered an expert in calligraphy. He carefully observed the 4 Mang characters written by Murong in front and Yelu in the back. The characters carved on the Chong flute were extraordinary. He didn't exchange the flute. Instead, he smiled and said, "Take good care of this keepsake. Who knows, maybe one day you'll be the shepherd girl Mu Ko Xianbei's head. If that day really comes, remember my kindness." The girl blushed when she saw how gentle and meticulous he was stroking her, making her even more charming. However, when she saw this young master from the southern court using her beloved Chong flute to stroke her back in such a careless manner, there was a hint of resentment in her eyes. Perhaps Su Fengnian was slow to realize it, or perhaps he was deliberately teasing her, but when he saw her face, he couldn't help but smile. He extended a finger and twirled the Chong flute's opening, grinning wickedly. The girl's face was thin, and she was about to cry. Su Fengnian returned the Chong flute to her and lay down on the grass. He was afraid that there wouldn't be many days of such leisure and carefree days in the future. The girl sitting cross-legged beside Su Fengnian clutched the Chong flute and lowered her head, saying, "I'm sorry." This time, she really was crying. Su Fengnian knew that she was apologizing for her cowardice after being saved in the canyon. The corner of his mouth curled up, and he said in a calm tone, "It's not wrong for a girl to be timid. If you feel that it's wrong, you can be bolder and sit on me. Even if I suffer such humiliation, I won't resist." Su Fengnian was originally teasing the girl, and he was just teasing her. He didn't think that this girl would really use up all her courage and boldness in her life to sit on his waist. His Royal Highness, who had been suppressed, sucked in a breath of cold air and said sanctimoniously, "Girl, please have some self-respect." Chapter 3. Around 3 in the morning. Not included in tomorrow's update. Chapter 472. An ignorant girl straddled the man's waist and sat with her but raised. You couldn't expect her to be good at horsemanship in this aspect. Su Fengnian, on the other hand, was very familiar with it. Just a moment ago, he was like a chaste woman who was awe-inspiring and righteous, asking the girl to respect herself. However, when he saw her taking the initiative, he immediately changed his attitude and started to undress himself without hesitation. Having illicit sexual intercourse in the wild, having a banquet in heaven and earth, and wantonly humiliating the northern Mang woman. It should be the dream of many weak northern Liang gentry children. Su Fengnian had seen many of these poor rich scholars who thought that they could compete with the soldiers who led troops to kill the enemy by riding on the northern Mang prostitute's body in the brothel. Su Fengnian's eyes were clear as he looked at the herdsman who seemed to be crying and laughing at the same time. He stopped what he was doing, which was mostly acting. She undoubtedly had a pair of bright eyes, which were not the kind that directly pointed at one's heart, but the kind that was pure and untainted by dust and dirt. This kind of woman's eyes were destined to be like the clear lake on the grassland beside him, which would disappear into the yellow sand sooner or later. Once he saw her this year, he might not see her again next year. Even if she was a golden branch and jade leaf left behind in the grassland, even if she returned to the palace, what benefit would it bring? Su Fengnian did not have the charming thought of taking off his clothes to see her naked, but he was not allowed to take advantage of her. He smiled and shook his head, indicating for her to relax. At the same time, he held her extremely flexible and slender waist with both hands in an inappropriate position. The two of them looked at each other. The so-called killing a beauty with a sword under the waist was probably the true portrayal of Su Fengnian at this moment. No matter how innocent and naive the girl was, she matured early. No matter how ignorant she was not a fool. She also knew what kind of evil was suppressed under her soft buttocks. Riding a horse and herding sheep would not be so embarrassing. This was not a woman who deliberately wanted to seduce people. Even though Su Fengnian had been untainted by flowers for a long time, he also felt that those fallen monarchs who never went to the morning court were not wronged. Su Fengnian's hands quietly slid down, and naturally squeezed. This was a skill that came with practice. Back then, during the 3 years of traveling, he had relied on this ingenious technique to make that brat Wenhua prostrate himself in admiration. Unfortunately, this brat's comprehension ability was worlds apart from His Highness the Crown Prince's, and he could not maintain a righteous expression as a moral person. Unfortunately, he had a lecherous face that deserved a beating. Every time he mustered up the courage to go to the downtown area to take advantage of women, Su Fengnian would inevitably have to step in to save the situation. If Wenhua cooperated, saliva would immediately flow from the corner of his mouth, and then he would say that he was an idiot brother in the family. Girls with weak temperaments would be soft-hearted and let him off, but those who were more shrewish would be punched and kicked, implicating Su Fengnian as a fish in the moat. Among the latter, Shenyuan Qingfeng was the most relentless, leading his vicious servants to chase after them for several streets. The young girl did not say anything and only stared at him with her eyes wide open. In his life, other than a girl's crying, Su Fengnian could not stand this kind of pure gaze. He could only withdraw his hands in embarrassment and laugh as he scolded. "You're the only one who's allowed to ride a horse, but I'm not allowed to flatter you?" The young girl, who was not used to puns, thought carefully. When she had figured out the meaning, she clumsily revealed a slightly late bashfulness. Su Fengnian saw her charmingly naive appearance and could not bear to do it. He sat up and held her in his arms, lightly smelling the fragrance of her fine black hair, and feeling the delicate trembling of her virgin body. He sighed and slowly released her. Beimang's customs were bold and unrestrained. Not only were there illegal activities permitted by the law, but there was also the custom of kidnapping a bride, as well as the remarriage of a woman whose sister had passed away and whose mother had become a widow's sister-in-law. These were all excellent reasons for the scholars of the Central Plains to criticize the barbarians of Beimang. Su Fengnian picked her up and put her down beside him. Hung Chunlei sat on his lap and stared at the lake, lost in thought. A 16-year-old beauty's body was so soft that it was as if a hero had entered the grave. Perhaps if it were any other man who had suffered internal injuries from holding himself back, he would have already taken advantage of her reluctance and enjoyed the pleasure of having sex with her. After he had eaten his fill, he would not recognize her and would touch his crotch to laugh at the common people. However, His Royal Highness, who had begun to feel melancholy again, turned his head and laughed. If only you were Pei Nan Wei or Yu Yu Wei. There was no woman in the world who liked to be compared with other women. Although the girl was ignorant about love, she could still hear the weight of the words. She did not dare to show her grievance and only turned her head away. Su Fengnian stood up and made a plan in his mind. He wanted to see if he could help this group of fleeing herdsmen settle down. If he had the chance to return safely in the future, he would take her back to Bailiang Palace. Not to mention whether she would be a vase or eaten, it would be good for the eyes. Later on, when he evaluated the top 10 beauties and spent some money, she would definitely be on the list. If word got out, it would be a happy thing to make those scholars envious. If he ate her now, would he take her to the north? If he ate her but did not take her back, Su Fengnian did not want to hear that she had become the exclusive property of some vigilant person in his tent. His Royal Highness, who had been taken advantage of by Xu Xiu countless times, had also learned some superficial disguising techniques. The finished product could only be considered a shoddy product, but it could still be considered a cover-up. However, was she willing? The herdsmen of the tribe could not reveal the secret? Especially some young and strong men who had left their homes and harbored resentment. They might even use a few bags of silver to win the favor of Xian Shirley for the sake of wealth and future. The human heart was unpredictable. Even if he had saved the entire tribe, Su Fengnian did not feel that he could sit back and relax. He did not want them to be his puppet. Su Fengnian thought about it and decided to stay in this ill-fated herdsman's tribe for a few days. He asked, "What is your name?" She said softly, "Huyen Guanyin." Su Fengnian knew that many people in Beimang respected and believed in Buddhism. Many people liked to use Bodhisattva, Maitreya, and Manjushri as their names. It was not rare or strange. If it was in the spring and autumn period in the Central Plains, the name was too big and would be regarded as ominous. However, in Beimang, it was very common to use such names as small characters. Even the women's clothing was deeply affected. In the winter, they painted their faces with yellow material, which appeared golden. It was called Buddhist makeup, which could only be washed away in the warm spring. When the emissaries of the Liang dynasty first saw the women in Beimang, most of their faces were yellow. They thought it was because of the illness caused by the miasma. Chapter 473. Su Fengnian asked her to take it to the tribal camp. Huyen was a first-class family name on the grasslands, similar to the Tuoba family, second only to the Yelu and Murong royal families. It was bestowed by the Mang lord who was well versed in the culture of the Central Plains 100 years ago. Presumably, this tribe city was a descendant of the Huyen family. However, the family name was prestigious, but it didn't mean that anyone with the surname Huyen was a noble. Beimang had a strict hierarchy, not inferior to the Liang dynasty at all. People were divided into 4 classes. Originally, there were only 2 classes, the native of Beimang and the remnant of the spring and autumn period. They were fiercely opposed and had countless disputes. The chess and sword music school's Taiping order proposed to divide the people into 2 classes, both below the remnant of the spring and autumn period. In fact, they were all sinners or stubborn people who were forcibly brought into Beimang territory by force. Their numbers were relatively small, but even so, the remnant of the spring and autumn period were all grateful. It was their nature not to worry about scarcity, but to worry about inequality. Not only that, but they had also become a person above others. Of course, The people were divided into 4 classes. The small group of nobles who stood at the top of each class, regardless of wealth or status, were far beyond the reach of ordinary people. Su Fengnian muttered to himself, Tuoba, Huyen Guanyin, these names are quite interesting. Are there Yelu Methreya and Murong Puxian? She said softly. Yes. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and flicked his finger on her forehead. You don't know how to read people's expressions at all. With your blockhead, even if you really went to the imperial tent in the imperial city, you wouldn't be able to become a princess with 100,000 thoughts. She raised her voice slightly. Perhaps this was the biggest protest in the world. I'm not. Su Fengnian pinched her chin and teased. You say you're not? Then if I say I'm the emperor of Beimang, then I'm the emperor of Beimang? She blushed and retorted seriously. Her Majesty is a woman. Su Fengnian sighed and no longer reasoned with her. When he went to the herdsman's tribe with her, he was worshipped as a god. Su Fengnian went up and down in the canyon like an immortal, saving more than 20 people, and then he stopped the herd of cows. With the help of a Buddha-like old monk, everyone, regardless of age, knelt on the ground devoutly. The old patriarch even shed tears as if the grievances of migrating thousands of miles had been swept away. Beimang's people were simple and honest, unlike the famous people of the Liang dynasty who believed in Huang Lao in prosperous times and escaped to Buddhism in troubled times. Anyway, they did whatever they could to protect themselves. In the tribe, only Huyen Guanyin knew the language of the southern dynasties, so she passed the message. When they found out that the young Bodhisattva was going to stay in the tribe for a few days, they were all very happy. The young children and girls were even more excited. Besides Huyen Guanyin, there were also a few girls who were rescued by Su Fengnian and hoped that the handsome Bodhisattva who was not like a herdsman could stay in their yurt. The grassland household registration was based on a yurt. When Beimang was first established as the emperor's palace was just a yurt. Even the previous emperor had to stay with his confidants and close officials every time he went hunting. Therefore, the Liang dynasty secretly criticized that when the Empress of Beimang was still the empress, she had an affair with several powerful officials while the emperor was sleeping soundly. This really surprised the people of the Central Plains who lived in the imperial palace. The tribe leader was called Huyen Anbao. He personally welcomed Su Fengnian into the spacious black and white yurt. Other than the simple and honest son and daughter-in-law, the old man also had a granddaughter and a granddaughter. The granddaughter was once brought up the mountain by Su Fengnian and was extremely happy. The grandson was the child who was always held by Huyen Guanyin at the bottom of the canyon. He stared at Su Fengnian's eyes as if he was looking at a deity, full of reverence and worship. When Su Fengnian entered the yurt, the child and his sister stood outside the yurt together and looked at the young deity's elegant demeanor through the gap. They only felt that every movement of the young deity was extremely beautiful. They reckoned that when Su Fengnian burped and farted, the two siblings would think that it was a great knowledge. Beimang revered martial arts and was good at horseback archery. They especially revered powerful martial artists who had outstanding strength and strong fists. Tuoba stepped on the bones of his fellow tribesmen to become the empress's servant. Revenge had never changed in Beimang for thousands of years. The Dangxiang tribe especially focused on revenge. If they didn't take revenge, they would inevitably be disheveled and dirty. They wouldn't get close to women and wouldn't eat meat. Only after killing their enemies could they return to normal. After both sides reconciled, they would need to fill the skull wine cup with human blood and the blood of 3 animals. Both sides swore that if they took revenge, they would take the lives of 6 animals. When Tuoba gradually became the god of war and had outstanding military achievements, the 16 tribes of the Dangxiang tribe were convinced. They proposed to the #1 person in Beimang to reconcile. Tuoba ignored them and the leaders of the 16 tribes committed suicide together. Later on, when the empress appeared, Tuoba only agreed verbally. Not only did the Dangxiang tribe not see it as a great shame, they even took it as an honor. Without exception, the valiant and strong young men joined Tuoba's personal army. It could be seen that Beimang had a strong spirit of martial arts. Sitting in the tent, after listening to Huyen Guanyin's narration, they found out that her tribe's migration wasn't done blindly. Huyen Anbao's father, who died on the way, was a staunch believer in evil spirits. He was a well-known fortune-teller who was good at using wormwood to burn sheep's scapula. Back then, it was this old man who took in the baby girl in swaddling clothes. At the end of winter, it was this old fortune-teller who used the cursed sheep to request the tribe to migrate to the southeast. Su Fengnian was skeptical of this kind of fortune-telling witchcraft. When he heard it, he didn't take it to heart. When he found out that Huyen Guanyin lived in the adjacent tent, he glanced at her. It was just a small gesture out of habit, but it made the young girl blush like a peach blossom. The old tribal leader saw it but didn't say anything. He just smiled and felt gratified. The little girl was alone and had no one to rely on. In the end, she still needed to marry a man with broad shoulders to truly settle down. The old man had complete faith in this young master Su, who claimed to be from Gusai Prefecture. At the bottom of a narrow valley, a man could stop 10,000 bulls. It was a miracle that he didn't even dare to think about. The old man still remembered the legend of 9 swords breaking 10,000 cavalry that had been circulating in the grassland for 100 years. Although it was a magnificent feat of the Wu family swordsmen from the Central Plains, he felt that the young bodhisattva sitting in the same tent was comparable to those 9 swordsmen. After Su Fengnian drank a big bowl of wine and ate big chunks of meat, he walked out of the tent with his head lowered. Huyen Guanyin followed behind him. Su Fengnian slowly walked up a small hill. Other than the young girl, there was also the old tribal leader's grandson sneakily following from afar. He seemed to be called Abaoji by his nickname. Su Fengnian looked at the setting sun and suddenly narrowed his eyes. A yellow eagle that was originally hovering leisurely cried incessantly. It swept across the sky and swayed as it fell. 100 miles to the northeast, the yellow eagle fell to the ground. There was a small bird's claw that was like an iron hook that was nailed into the eagle's back. It was only heard of the eagle catching the sparrow. Was there really a sparrow riding an eagle in this world? The extraordinarily handsome bird flew to the shoulder of a young man who had a sword and a saber hanging from the left side of his waist. Its cry was crisp and clear. The young man in the fox fur hat had 2 retainers standing beside him. One of them was a middle-aged man with a strong body like a lion. His voice was as loud as a bell. "Young master, you've already killed no less than 600 people and 4,000 wild bulls on your way here. Have you enjoyed yourself?" The other old man in a brocade robe said gloomily, "Of the 10 great devils, other than you and I, who are both slaves to the young master, I haven't seen any of the other 8. How can I enjoy myself?" The young man sneered with a strong smell of blood. He reached out to tease the small bird on his shoulder and said, "Devils and whatnot are actually boring to kill. Killing that Buddhist saint is more interesting." The self-proclaimed Beimang demonic old man nodded and said, "This dragon tree monk of the 2 Zen temples is said to be the master of the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin. We should meet him." Hearing the name Li Xiaoxin, the young man's eyes turned red. He reached out to gently hold the small bird and suddenly exerted force. His hand was covered in blood. He gritted his teeth and said, "They all deserve to die." Chapter 474. The young master in the fox fur hat casually tossed away the falcon-hunting sparrow. He rubbed his thumb and fingers together. The blood was thick, and he sniffed it. Obviously, he had a shrewd and ruthless personality. He wiped his fingers on the fox fur coat. The middle-aged man said, "Even though the old bald donkey Long Shu is a saint, he is from the 3 sections. His realm is too fake and can't be accurate. There are more than 30 people in the martial arts role of the dynasty who are first-class 4 states. I reckon only these people can enter the young master's eyes. Even though the Vajra state is divided into big and small and the Buddha's invincible golden body is respected, it is still the ability to take a beating. When it comes to killing people, I'm afraid even compared to the Confucian and Taoist sects, not to mention me and my brother who are from the demonic sections. This bald donkey from the 2 Zen temples is the most suitable for the young master to practice his knife. He can hack 800,000 times in one go to verify if the Buddha is really invincible." The elder in the brocade robe sneered, "Duanbo heir, are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid? A saint is a saint. How can his golden body be broken so easily? Be careful that you don't get to eat the lamb. You and I know each other well. Besides, no matter how good the young master's talent is, he is not 20 yet. He still can't enter the Vajra state after fighting with the bulls. Can the 3 of us gain anything by intercepting and killing Long Shu monk?" The man sneered, "What's so difficult about that? It is a secret that the old bald donkey entered our dynasty. We can let the young master find a few great guardians and gather 1 or 2,000 cavalrymen. We can use the wheel war to kill the old bald donkey. When the time comes, the young master will chop off his head and be the only person who can kill a land immortal. Who would dare not to submit?" The elder said in disdain, "If the saint wants to leave and avoid the battle, even if he has 1 or 2,000 cavalrymen, can he catch up?" The middle-aged man crossed his fingers and his joints cracked. He laughed sinisterly. The old bald donkey eats vegetarian food and chants to Buddha. When the time comes, we will threaten him with the lives of a few hundred herdsmen. If he dares to escape, we will kill one for each step. Let's see how far he can run. Hundreds of people died because of his cowardice. If this news spreads out, the old bald donkey Long Shu is no more than a holy monk. How can he still have the face to talk about Dharma with our imperial preceptor, Immortal Qilin? The old man in the brocade robe with the surname Tuoba had a feminine aura like a water snake, which made people feel uncomfortable just by looking at him. The middle-aged man with a sturdy physique looked more righteous, but the latter was more flattering, which suited his identity as an evil servant. The young master raised his hand to prevent the embroidered-robed retainer from blurting out sarcastic words. He removed a pitch-black metal tablet from his waist and instructed, "Go back, go to the nearby tents and pass on my order. Gather 1,200 cavalry in 3 days. When the time comes, we will meet at Yellow Eagle Valley and intercept the Dragon Tree Monk together. If anyone dares to disobey, I'll allow you to act first and report later. I don't believe there's an eagle on the prairie that isn't afraid of my Tuoba family." Duanbo heir acknowledged the order and left. In the Baimang dynasty, other than the royal family and the young master's family, there was no other branch that could make 2 of the 10 great devils willingly become their servants. This time, he left home because of his father's unwillingness to let him lead an army to the border of Gusai State alone. His father was clearly an invincible martial artist who relied on his glorious military exploits to reach the top of the royal court, but he actually valued his elder brother who read the classics of the Central Plains so highly. He favored one and discriminated against the other, which really annoyed him. However, although he didn't like his elder brother's actions, their brotherhood had never faded. Especially in these years, when he caused countless troubles, it was always his kind-hearted elder brother who came forward to settle everything. He didn't hesitate to become enemies with many of the Yelu Murong children. He was very grateful for this, especially when that foxy sister-in-law took the initiative to seduce him at the beginning of the year. Even his father was furious and wanted to cripple his martial arts without listening to his explanation. It was still his elder brother who calmed his father's anger. After that, the brothers had a heart-to-heart talk and pulled the woman who was nominally his sister-in-law to him. He laughed and said that he was sick and would sooner or later die because of him. Looking at his elder brother's gentleness and the woman's shame, even with his father's innate ruthlessness and cold-bloodedness, he couldn't help but feel moved. He remembered that when he was young, before his father's military exploits, the 2 brothers relied on each other for survival. Indeed, the elder brother was like a father and never let him be bullied by the tribe. This proud son of the prairie and desert muttered, "As long as you don't live past 40 years old and don't fight with me, I will always see you as my elder brother." The demon in brocade robe turned a deaf ear to the young master's heart-wrenching words. The young man touched the hilt of his knife and asked, "Who is the recent Shinti?" The old man smiled and replied, "It's Chu Char from the Huiwe tribe. He is in charge of 20 to 30,000 people. His tribe members are good at hunting leopards and lions." Chu Char was originally a small official in the eagle catching room. He was only promoted to Shinti after offering a few good eagles as tribute to the Huiwe tribe leaders. "I heard that the women in the tribe are very beautiful," the young master said indifferently. "Then go to Chu Char and rest. As for the women, you can choose as you like." The demon in brocade robe got along with this extremely noble young man. He was far from being as servile as the middle-aged man. He laughed and said, "I know that the young master has high standards and doesn't care for these vulgar things. It would be impolite for me to refuse." The young man dismissed it with a smile. To him, there were only a few women in Baimang. For example, the national pipa player of the current dynasty, who was known for her slender hands and excellent drumming skills, the princess who was rumored to have an affair with Chen Jibao of Bailiang, the princess of the Murong family of the Golden Toad State who liked to keep male companions, and a woman who was a zither player among the top 10 demons. Other than these, there were not many women who could arouse his interest. He suddenly asked, "I heard that the 10th demon, Xia Ling, is dead?"